Recently, the guy's name had been uttered very often in the school class due to his constant falling asleep. Today was no exception, and the teacher once again caught Lu Shen sleeping. The whole class laughed at him while the teacher got angry and reprimanded him about the upcoming exams. In order to get any kind of profession, one had to have a proper health status obtained originally at school. It was for this reason that the teacher was so angry at the guy who didn't even have a one. His classmates couldn't stop making fun of Lu Sheng and told the teacher to ignore him because it was his choice. However, the teacher was still upset that the guy didn't even try, and he would have to live somehow after school. The bell rang, and all the kids in the class began to noisily gather for recess. Liu Qi, one of Lu Shen's close friends, asked if his friend was worried about his eternal nightmares with monsters again. Lu Shen only silently sighed deeply and indulged in the memories of his recent dreams. He was once again dreaming of a dystopian apocalyptic world where there was not a soul around, except monsters. He even thought that these nightmares would definitely drive him insane someday, since his health had already dropped significantly. His friend noticed Lu Shen's slumped face and tried to cheer him up, reminding him that they were just ordinary guys, not geniuses. He jumped up and invited his buddy to play a game of console, to which he was refused, arguing that he wanted to rest. Lu Qi was surprised by this response and even thought that his friend was sick, but Lu was determined to get a good night's sleep at home. At this moment, the other guys started calling Lu with them, waving their hands cheerfully. Lu Qi realized that his buddy wouldn't change his mind, and after saying goodbye to him, he headed off to his waiting company. Lu Shen also packed his things and went home, while concurrently pondering everything that was happening to him. He couldn't even think that when he returned from the dream world to reality, he would be thinking about some exams. The guy remembered about the upcoming math test and decided to get something when he got home. Lu Shen thought for a moment that the world from his dreams, which is completely contrary to everything in reality, is not so different. For a moment, he gazed at the large posters and stopped, thinking about something. Suddenly, he was almost hit by a strong woman carrying a bunch of heavy boxes above her head and shouted to be more careful on the roads. Lu Shen looked at her enthusiastically and thought that one day he would also like to become as strong as her. At this time, somewhere in one of the old houses in the alley, someone was gluing massage cushions on someone's back. The man was clenching his teeth slightly in pain and asking to give more gently, while the woman promised that she was already finishing. It was Lu Shen's parents who happily welcomed him home, wondering why he was back so early. The father, without waiting for an answer, asked if the boy was hungry because he would still be serving. After a moment, he added that since his sister hadn't come home yet, he could snack on an apple and wait for her for a full meal. Lu Shen suddenly asked his father why they still hadn't bought the blood circulation machine that all of his classmates already had. His father began to joke that he was still young and no disease would take him, and these massage cushions were just for prevention. A little digging under the table, he took something and said that he had a small gift. On the table were 2 vials of the latest healing powder from a charity clinic. The mother became excited and surprised and started asking her father if these were the same powders that were being touted on TV for $20,000. She was so excited because they were very beneficial to the students and they couldn't afford them on their own. Her mother was working at the market and said that she had just gotten a whole pig's head today, and such an event should be celebrated. Lu Shen stood there silently listening to his parents cheering each other on, not knowing what to say. His silence was destined to be interrupted because his mother inquired about his health status. They were so worried about it because the school was raising the scores for the exam and further study. Lu Shen didn't want to upset them on such a happy day for them, and simply replied that he knew and remembered everything. Just upon entering his room, he immediately cast a glance at the barbell and thought that he needed to urgently start improving his physical fitness. The guy quickly took the appropriate stance and began to do a warm-up, observing the correct breathing technique. He knew 24 body reconstruction techniques, but he didn't know how to successfully apply all of them. Today, he wanted to pay special attention to the radio gymnastics section, namely the 14th exercise. These techniques were developed from ancient yoga and judo and recommended by the International Martial Arts Union. They help beginners strengthen their bodies, and right now, Lu Shen had reached the 13th exercise. Their world had changed 300 years ago when monsters that changed the course of history began to emerge from cracks in the earth. Modern weapons had lost their relevance, and humanity had to find new ways to fight back. At the same time, a genetic trait within humans was unlocked, after which human strength grew exponentially. As a consequence, their era, the era of martial arts, flourished. Despite all this progress, the problem with monsters, unfortunately, didn't go anywhere. It still threatened humanity with extinction, and every day cities were destroyed under the onslaught of monsters, which did not bode well. The city heads spoke repeatedly about how all of their children had been born in a difficult time for everyone, and now it was their turn to build the future. Lu Shen plopped down on the floor and only thought about the fact that he had already made as many as 3 technique approaches, and his status still hadn't changed. He couldn't forgive himself for this, after all. Even his little sister was of a higher status than him, and his parents had worked so hard to obtain this powder. It was as if the universe had given him a second chance, a second life in the martial arts world. But was this really the limit of what he could do? Lu Shen was so angry that he decided not to stop at 3 approaches and do 5 or even 6 times. He abruptly stood up and realized that everything started to spin and blur in front of his eyes. In a second, his eyes closed and opened several times with a clear sense of flying in space. Lu Shen quickly realized that he was in that wasteland from his dreams, surrounded by skeletons and piles of bones. He started pinching himself to wake up, but nothing was happening, causing him to feel frightened and misunderstand what was happening. At some point, the guy felt strange sounds and someone's breathing behind him, and when he turned around, he saw a vicious zombie. The monster roared monstrously and pounced on Lu Shen, who, although he didn't expect such a thing, he was able to put up a defense in time. As long as he held the monster with red eyes at arm's length, he was able to see who it was. The enraged zombie wouldn't stop roaring loudly, and the guy didn't understand why such punishment had come upon him and still hadn't let go. The zombie tried to hit Lu Shen a few times, but the guy managed to endure and deftly dodge. He clenched his teeth and used all his strength to hold back the legs of the zombie, who clearly wanted to destroy him and eat fresh meat. Lu Shen clearly realized that even if his health status was low and he was bad at close combat, it wasn't the end. The guy was not going to just give up and push the zombie away from him with all his might. When the monster flew back a few meters, Lu Shen immediately jumped up from the ground and picked up the first stone he could find. He jumped to the monster and pinned it down without being able to free himself so that he could quickly kill it with the stone. Lu Shen swung around and gave several strong blows to the dead man's head. At some point, he realized that it was over, but he gave one last strong blow. The guy was breathing frequently and sat on top of the destroyed zombie, covered all over with his corpse fluid. He looked at the monster's stone-pierced head and concluded to himself that the head was their weak point and could be dealt with faster that way. While he was pondering, he didn't notice as the liquid from the zombie began to leak out and upwards, getting closer and closer to him. In a second, this unknown slurry enveloped the guy's entire body, as if filling his entire brain with new memories. He saw in his head pictures of some young guy who, being on vacation at the seashore, was going to the army to meet in a new corps. The next picture was this unknown man's service in the base defense team number 1359. There he was trained in martial arts techniques on which his life and the lives of his coworkers literally depended. At one point, the commander started shouting that their base was surrounded by monsters and beasts, and they should prepare for a powerful attack. Lu Shen finally came to his senses and didn't understand why he was seeing some pictures of this zombie's life, although it wasn't hard to guess that it was after it was destroyed. The liquid on the guy's body began to evaporate like a thick fog, leaving behind not even a trace. The area Lu Shen was in was swimming in the abundance of these monsters, so in exactly 1 minute, there was a new zombie behind him, preparing to attack. At some point, the guy still noticed the monster and began to defend himself, and then attacked. He deftly dodged and made a few quick jumps around the monster, delivering blow after blow. His eyes seemed to be filled with power, and his body was obeying new martial arts techniques that he himself had never known before. After finishing off the zombie, Lu Shen's eyes still retained that frenzied glow that gave him such power for a while. As soon as he came to his senses, for a moment, he was even afraid of what had just happened to him. He stood there screaming like crazy that he just couldn't do it, because he didn't even realize when he had become so fast and strong. Lu Shen concentrated and looked at his hands, seeing a stream of energy coming from them, which was the source of this new power. He felt this power spilling over his entire body and guessed that it belonged to the zombie he had destroyed. The guy also realized that he had not only received the memories of that dead man, but also skills with the power. Despite all this, he still couldn't believe that he had just absorbed the life experience of a zombie, because in theory, this was impossible. A second later, Lu Shen exhaled deeply, realizing that this was just a dream, and in reality, he was just an ordinary weak guy whose health status didn't even reach one. The guy walked on and decided that the terrain here was quite strange, even for his inflamed mind, because everything looked quite realistic. He passed by the zombie he had finished off first and glimpsed the fragments of his memories again. Lu Shen stood as if hypnotized, remembering what he saw most vividly. The picture of the base, 1359 defense team number, appeared in front of him again and again. This base had already appeared in his first memories, and Lu decided he had to find it, as there was a chance he might find some information there about what was going on here. He felt that the memory absorption went better the second time than the first, especially from the zombies in military uniforms, so he decided to use that to improve his strength. The memories could also come in handy in the future to help him find the right places and mop up monsters better. While he was thinking about it, the clouds in the sky thickened, and something like a thunderstorm with lightning appeared, and the ground beneath his feet trembled. A sharp mist with wind appeared and dizziness set in, knocking the guy off his feet. After a second, he seemed to fall heavily to the floor, holding on with his last strength. When he raised his head, he realized that he found himself in his room again, which meant he was awake. Lu Shen heard his sister calling him loudly from the hallway for dinner, resenting him for staying in bed so long. All wet, as after a rainstorm, the guy opened the door and looked like a person who had just snapped out of a deep sleep. Lu Qinghe was Lu Sheng's younger sister, and asked him not to lie about him exercising, because his sleepy face said something completely different. At one point, she scrutinized him and took a very serious look, and stopped joking around. Lu Shen tried to smooth things over somehow, and began to crumple and mumble something about coming down soon. He also added that he didn't even notice how quickly he had passed out and apologized for waiting. Lu Qinghe didn't seem to be listening to her brother anymore and was greatly embarrassed, quickly turning away and telling him to go downstairs for dinner before the food got cold. She couldn't help but notice how much her brother was pumped up and looked quite muscular, though she hadn't noticed him exercising lately. The guy replied with some sadness that he'd be right over, and she remembered how once, as a little girl, she had literally never fallen off of him. He had always been her big brother who protected and cheered her up, but now things had fundamentally changed. Once they went to school and she found out the results of her status, then her attitude towards her brother changed drastically, which was surprising to him because her status was above 1 and her combat skills were above 100. Soon, Lu Qinghe even received an invitation to a prestigious martial arts institute, and to increase the gulf between them even further, she was endowed with a naturally brilliant mind. Lu Shen thought he was just her dumbass brother who was, like in typical snotty movies, the dumb-headed sibling of the smart sister. While he was thinking about this, he was throwing off his wet t-shirt in parallel, and happened to notice his reflection in the mirror, which he didn't immediately recognize. He got a clear abs and a burst of energy, and the former weakness seemed to have gone along with the drowsiness. He decided to do some exercises for martial arts techniques, and noticed that the memories from the zombies, along with their techniques, were still with him. Lu Shen couldn't believe that he felt definitely stronger, although he didn't understand how this was even possible. As he went downstairs to eat dinner, he pondered on how he was able to transfer the abilities he had received in his dream into reality. It seemed to him that he had fallen into a fairy tale, without noticing that he had eaten a huge portion of dinner. It even seemed to him that his mother began to cook better because the food was just great, and he immediately asked for more. The whole family stared in surprise at the guy who had barely eaten half of it before, let alone more. Lu Sheng felt embarrassed by himself and laughed, and said that he just wanted to thank them for the delicious dinner, and said that he was full. He didn't understand where such a vicious appetite came from when his father told his son not to talk nonsense, because no one would let him starve in his own home. The father asked his mother to cook something quick so that they would be sure to be full. He seemed most happy about it, for he had decided that their boy was becoming a man, and would now eat constantly to his heart's content. He also promised to buy his son something healthy and tasty tomorrow, because adolescence is a good time to improve health status, and such a chance should be taken. Lu Qinghe said that statute was not a weight and would not grow at their will, so she was very interested to see what would come of it, since 18 was no longer adolescence. Her father wasn't happy that her sister was bullying her brother, studying at a prestigious university instead of a highly specialized one like her brother. While father and daughter were bickering amongst themselves, the boy thought he could feel his health status improving in his sleep, so he urgently needed to be checked at the dojo. After resting a bit after dinner, he headed towards the dojo building where health status evaluations are held. On the wall was a poster of the dojo master Ni Hongchuan, who was a 4th-ranked martial artist specializing in boxing. By gradation, a rank 1 martial arts master was a promising student, rank 2 became a professional instructor, and rank 3 became a consultant. A rank 4 master could be someone whose health status was over 200 units and whose martial skills were valued at 100,000 points, which Master Ni Hongchuan was. Everyone knew that high-ranked masters were literally superhumans that were almost impossible to reach. He quickly read the requirements on the board to enter this institute, which were simply frantic. Lu Shen realized that if his sister wanted to enter this sect, his parents would definitely find the money, but it was unlikely to happen for him, so he would learn everything in his sleep. At the entrance behind the counter, a receptionist greeted him politely, asking if he wanted to sign up for their classes. Lu Shen replied that he had come here to assess his health status and martial skills. The secretary only mercurially thought about the fact that he didn't even have a personal trainer, and it smacked of poverty. She suggested that he go to room number 8, where there was an evaluation machine, and the guy thanked her for her help. Lu Shen walked inside the room and was anxious to find out his new health status. He walked over and placed his hand on the glowing orb that was making an accurate assessment with absorption. His health status turned out to be practically 1 with the rank of rookie. The guy was beyond excited, as the status had actually increased in just a matter of an hour, showing clear progress. He also realized that he had almost caught up with his little sister, and at this rate, he could quickly reach the rank of martial arts master. Next, Lu Shen decided to test his martial skills by approaching the next car. He took a fighting stance and thought about which technique to use best. The guy was determined that he would do well, since he had already acquired the skills of destroying zombies. It was logical because those martial arts were carved into the subcortex of the destroyed monsters, and now he had them too. The guy did a small warm-up and swing for a punch, sensing the presence here of the spirits of the guys who had died once before turning into zombies. In the next second, he quickly moved on the assessment machine with a powerful attack. The machine began to boot up to more accurately determine the guy's combat power. Just a second later, the combat skill numbers on the machine's screen appeared at 113. Lu Shen could not believe his eyes, because this was a huge increase, and at this rate, he would be able to reach great heights very soon. All these results were from an hour's sleep, and he couldn't wait to see what would happen after 8 or 9 hours of rest. He was sure that he could change dramatically overnight, but as soon as it was time to sleep, he couldn't sleep a wink. Lu Shen jumped up like crazy and started jumping on the bed, screaming that because of this stupid regimen, he couldn't sleep now. After looking at the clock, he decided that it was too early and he could practice a little bit, as sleep would come on its own after that. Lu really wanted to record the result of his new health status and started to exercise. The training started with the 13th exercise of radio gymnastics. While performing the technique, the guy noticed something quite strange and unusual. It was not like the exercises he had performed many times, but seemed like something completely new. It was as if the body itself was performing memorized movements that only the brain of a military man could remember. He recalled the images from his memories after the zombie slaying again and began to guess what was going on. Those exercises were not his at all, but that zombie soldier's, absorbed into him along with his memory. The lights were turned off in almost all of Lu Shen's house, except for a few rooms, including his, where the honed movements of the combat training could be seen. With each new strike, he could feel the blood in his veins boiling, and he became stronger. He didn't feel weak and tired at all and decided to practice 200 more times. With each new movement, the guy felt the energy spilling over his entire body. At some point in the training, Lu Shen realized that it was not just about the exercises alone, and there was something else. There was a very important technique of proper breathing, which was closely monitored by the zombie soldier's commander when he was alive. The guy was experiencing an amazing sensation that was like practicing for a year or even several years. The realization suddenly came to him that his dreams were a valuable resource and a true treasure to him. A moment later, he thudded to the floor and felt a wild hunger that he had never felt before in his life. It was unbearable, and he couldn't even imagine that as his body grew, so would his need for food. Lu also clearly realized that he would not be able to live only on ordinary food, and there was a great need for pharmacological drugs. Unfortunately, his family's budget could not afford such luxury in the form of expensive drugs, and his growth could stop. At this point, the realization came that there was an urgent need to find money, and one option was to go on scholarship. At his school, Bai He's scholarship paid out a sum of 10,000. If he wanted to get it, he had to become much stronger and better. The next day at school, all the guys moved to the martial arts gym. In the school locker room, the guys were preparing for class, exchanging achievements and simple chatter. Lucci started to tell his friend that the day had started strangely since the teacher hadn't checked their IDs, which could mean pair fights that hadn't happened in a while. Lu Shen knew very well that he had to show off at any given opportunity and purposely flashed his perfect abs as if to hint that he was not wasting any time. His friend rushed to touch his biceps and triceps, wondering how he was able to bulk up so quickly. Lu Shen simply replied that he had exercised long and hard, adding that it was time to get a haircut. Lu Qi thought it was all about showing off in front of the girls, to which Lu replied that it was because of the upcoming exams, for which he needed to prepare well. To top it all off, the words about showing off didn't leave the guy's mind right away, and he decided to take advantage of it. He, more than anyone else, knew he had to take this chance. All the guys were already quickly gathering in the gym around the teacher for the start of class. The martial instructor, Junjian Guo, began to say that today they were learning the martial techniques that they had previously discussed in class. Liu Qi whispered to his buddy how he had heard that their instructor was second rank and had fought monsters in the wasteland. The combat instructor had a scar on his right cheek, which he was rumored to have gotten just after fighting there. Lu Shen thought about the fact that the instructor had a second rank, and this was a great opportunity to prove himself. But still, he thought that the teacher's techniques were rather primitive and not refined enough, although he was fluent in martial arts and did clear and complicated tricks. At the end of the demonstration, the martial instructor said that these were all the techniques they would learn today. He called Jian Yifei into the ring to demonstrate the exercises to everyone exactly after him. The girls in the class were just enamored with this guy and thought he was not only the strongest in the class, but also insanely handsome. Lu Qi didn't really like the fact that Yang attracted the attention of all the girls and was always the center of discussions. He also resented the fact that he was not only handsome, but also rich because his money allowed him to get all the best pharma, which was the name of the drugs among themselves. Everyone also knew that he was the teacher's favorite, and they, the ordinary guys, didn't even think of competing with him. Lu Shen thought about how the past version of him would have agreed with this statement, but now he was completely different and thought differently. Moreover, the guy was going to oust this Major Yang Yifei and show the teacher what he could do. After the training, the teacher told Jan that he was in pretty good shape, but he should work on his balance, and later he would show him how to correct the flaws because he had a huge potential. Jan Yifei thanked the teacher for the instruction and was waiting for a volunteer to do the doubles. The guy himself didn't really consider the teacher's opinion, as he considered him a weakling and not an equal to his family, because nobody doubted that he would have a good future anyway. The combat instructor asked the guys if anyone was willing to go out for a pair fight. Everyone quickly began to turn away, coughing and pretending that they hadn't heard anything. Lu Qi dejectedly said that he didn't see any point in it, as this guy wouldn't leave a wet spot on them. The teacher didn't like the fact that the guys looked away every time and hid their heads in the sand, because it was impossible to teach someone without his desire. The school only taught the basics, and one day, the day would come when they would have to defend themselves, and only the strongest would pass the natural selection. He also knew that everyone thought Johnny Fell was his favorite, even though it wasn't true. Unexpectedly, he came across Lu Shen's gaze, which was very different from all the others. The teacher carefully looked into the very depths of the boy's eyes and saw something amazing. It seemed that Lu Shen's eyes belonged to someone who had undergone a severe trial in life. He thought about the fact that he didn't even know that there was such a guy in their class and challenged him to a pair fight with Yang Yifei. Lu Qi had warned his friend beforehand to be careful and not to be too heroic, since exams were coming up. Lu Shen stood up and cheerfully replied to his friend not to worry, as he had time to train properly. The martial instructor said that they had a time limit of 10 minutes and asked them to keep their own safety in mind. Lu Shen walked to the middle of the hall and stood in front of Yang Yifei as the teacher asked them all to memorize today's lesson. The boys prepared themselves, and the teacher announced that the skill test was starting right now. He also noticed that there wasn't a drop of fear in Lu Shen's eyes and asked what his health status was the last time. The teacher was surprised to hear the guy's result and advised him to pay more attention to developing his strength, as it was considered the foundation of the basics. The martial instructor commanded for the fight to begin, and Yan Yifei grinned as he waited for his opponent to attack. He also advised the guy to keep his hands at head level because that was where he would attack. Lu Shen calmly listened to everything and asked his opponent to start the fight already, seeing how he swung. He remembered all of his teacher's instructions about keeping distance and watching his movements. He should also think about counterattacks and try to find a balance between the opponent's attack and offense and use heavy blows to finish the fight. All of these were necessary to obtain the status of speed and power. Jan Yifel would rush in with a punch at his opponent and was confident that the outcome of the fight was already a foregone conclusion, as the strongest would win. He desperately wanted weaklings like Lu Shen to lose in shame. All of the guy's judgments and assumptions were not destined to come true, as Lu Shen deftly dodged and immediately launched a powerful counterattack. A second before the blow, Yang Yifel could not believe that he saw a fist coming towards his face. Lu Shen attacked his opponent's haughty face with precision to give his best performance. Yang Yifel and his pea flew far back a few meters so fast that it seemed as if he was actually flying. From such an impact, the guy skidded right into the arms of his classmates, who were shocked at what was happening. The combat instructor immediately rushed towards the injured guy, as did everyone else. They whispered amongst themselves that Lu Shen had knocked out their best classmate with just one punch. Everyone looked at Lu and still couldn't believe that he had knocked out Yang in a couple seconds. Lu Shen himself seemed to have come out of some kind of trance and was trying to realize what had happened. He looked at his unconscious classmate and was as surprised as anyone else. The boy immediately rushed towards Yan to see how much damage had been done. The teacher shouted at the guys not to stand in a pole and immediately called the nurse over here. A short time later, the nurse called an ambulance, whose staff brought a stretcher and fixed a collar around the injured man's neck. As soon as the guy was taken to the hospital, Lu Shen approached Teacher Zhang and asked for a few minutes. He began to apologize for what had happened and clarified that he had simply miscalculated his strength. The martial instructor looked at the boy with a rather stern gaze, who was not at all clear on his reaction. A second later, he put his hand on the boy's shoulder and began to explain that injuries in martial arts were part and parcel, and let him not worry about his classmate as he would recover, asking him to follow him to his office to discuss something. Lu Shen agreed and said goodbye to his buddy, saying that he would go with the teacher for a few minutes. The classmates immediately started discussing what happened to this guy, and maybe he was on some substances, because it was simply impossible to master such power in such a short time. Liu Qi, like everyone else, knew the status of Yang, who was knocked out with a single blow, which meant that the status of Liu himself was much higher. The guy and the combat instructor finally came to his office to talk. At the entrance of the office, the guy saw a beautiful tree and a combat skill evaluation machine. He walked closer and told the teacher that he didn't know about his fascination with the bonsai tree. Teacher Jun replied that it was only a small hobby, and everyone had their own secrets. At this moment, OT turned around to the guy and looked at him enigmatically, expecting some kind of reaction. He once again inquired about his disciple's health status, which had to be below 1. Lu Shen immediately said that these were the results of the past testing, and it was completely different now. Just in case, the teacher asked if the boy was taking any banned substances to increase his status, as it was forbidden by the school's rules and could get him expelled. Lu Shen immediately started shouting that he wasn't doing anything like that and wasn't using anything illegal. He took out a box with an evaluation ball from the top drawer and suggested that the guy check his status right now, and if he used any illegal drugs, the ball would definitely show it. The next step was going to test his combat skills on the evaluation machine, because stability would be the best proof of his words. The guy calmly agreed to all the conditions of the combat instructor and placed his hand on the orb. In the same second, a blue glow rose from the ball, the power of which was not inferior to the master himself. A moment later, the orb revealed the guy's health status to be 1.5 units, which equated him to a rank 1 master. Teacher Zhong was shocked by what he saw and couldn't believe that a boy of 18 was already a master. He quickly thought that there was no such genius not only in their school, but also in White Lake City. At this time, Lu Shen moved to the second stage and hit the evaluation machine, knocking off its head, which broke the bonsai tree behind it. The guy saw the teacher's reaction to the broken tree and didn't know where to go from the awkwardness of the situation. The teacher realized that although this machine was made for students, it still had to be able to withstand the impact. As Lu Shen took out the head of the evaluation machine that flew into the wall, Jun thought about how the guy's strength went beyond rank 1 skill. The guy sat humbly and awkwardly in the chair opposite the teacher and waited for the conversation to start. Finally, the teacher started talking, and Lu Shen realized that it was going to be more like an interrogation than a normal conversation. Zheng began to say that not long ago the guy's status was below 1 and asked when he had last taken the test. Lu Sheng hesitated a bit as he tried to remember the exact date and answered that it was about half a month ago, surprising the teacher. The martial instructor began to ask the guy how he was able to double his strength in such a short time, unless he was a blue blood or a famous master. Lu Shan laughed nervously and replied that he was just an ordinary guy and no one was training with him. He also clarified that the things about increasing his strength he preferred to keep secret. The teacher still couldn't understand how he managed to increase his strength so much, where the rank was obviously higher than the first rank. He also remembered that he had good performance at his age, but it took him 2 years of meditation to reach rank 2 and enroll in the military. Even all of that didn't compare to what he felt on the battlefield with the monsters. A human in front of them was nothing. Teacher Jun remembered one of his battles with a huge monster and knew that in the face of an unfathomable and uncontrollable force, humans were powerless. And also that in a battle with such monsters, humans are mere ants. Despite all of this, there were still people who could stand up to monsters. These were the kind of people whose strength was as unfathomable and uncontrollable. Such people were called a kind of monsters in modern society. The combat instructor leaned back in his chair and began to say that with his skills, he needed to be trained in a class for the gifted. He was even going to call the dean's office about the guy because only there would he be able to get a decent education. The boy knew that studying in his sleep was better than anywhere else and said that he intended to stay here. The teacher did not understand the refusal because this school will not be able to reveal all his talent, but in any case, he can always turn to him on any question. Lu Shen decided to take advantage of the situation and asked if he could get a scholarship and a more flexible schedule. The teacher realized that the guy needed time and money and promised to talk about the schedule with the dean's office and call the ministry for a scholarship. He also clarified that the request would take about 2 days to process and asked the boy not to waste time and to train hard. The martial instructor gave Lu Sheng his card to use until he received his scholarship. The boy knew that it was a black martial arts MasterCard with a minimum of $100,000 on it, and his scholarship wouldn't be that much, so there was no need to spend it all at once. Teacher Zhang asked the boy to continue in the same spirit, so that in the future to glorify their school, and he in turn will help him in everything. He could not believe that in this God-forsaken place there was such a genius, who in his 18 years was already a master of the second rank, and decided to tell less about him to anyone, to use it as a secret weapon in the state exam. He also realized that it wasn't just about the state exams, and they had finally found the guy. He wanted to call his superiors and report that there was a soldier ready to go outside. Meanwhile, at the store, someone was buying a nourishing Orchid Heart Tonic, which was the newest product of the Rensin Medical Pavilion. The salesperson was telling them that this product was designed specifically for female masters, and it was currently priced at only $30,000. The mother bought her daughter a tonic and asked her to train hard to master the drink better, and the girl promised to take first place. Lu Shen looked at all this with regret, because his parents, even with their round-the-clock jobs, could not afford such preparations, and children from rich families got everything so easily. He also realized that his sister was a genius, and he was the ballast that was pulling her back and preventing her from developing and growing well. For some reason, it irritated him even himself that he in turn was only forever complaining about his worthlessness. At that moment, he realized that he was wasting his youth instead of acting and changing something. His buddy Liu Qi and his friend were just passing by and were discussing the release of a new game on the console. Lu Shen longed to see the amazing world of martial arts, but hid in these games because it was the only reminder of his past life. He was like an aquarium, hidden in his safe and secure world, but always dreamed of swimming out into the open ocean. It was a moment of enlightenment because now he realized that things were completely different. He went beyond his limits and saw the real world around him, once again having the opportunity to change his destiny. Lu Shen knew for sure that from today onwards, he would act consciously, making as few mistakes as possible. In the past few days, he had gained tremendous combat experience and greatly increased his skills. He would finally be able to break the cycle of poverty and powerlessness because all sorts of techniques now belonged to him. The boy remembered his teacher's words about knowing himself and realized that he had made a huge step forward. On the way, Better Shen went to the store and bought gifts for his family, promising to become stronger. In the dystopian apocalyptic world, zombies continuously attacked every living thing that came their way. They knew no fear, no fatigue, no regret, and simply walked into the unknown. Lu Shen, on the other hand, had a clear goal and plan of action regarding the monsters as he was about to become a great warrior. His technique was getting better and better each time, and he realized that he was raising his health status along with his fighting skills. In another fight with one of the monsters, the guy realized that the zombie was a master and used combat techniques. According to the zombie soldier's memories, base 1359 should be located ahead behind a bunch of monsters and fog, but there was nothing there but mountains. He only thought about the fact that he hadn't encountered any zombies in this area for a long time as the monsters ran at him. He overcame all of them in one dexterous dash and moved forward to the intended goal without stopping. While the guy ran, he did not even notice how he passed the mountains and reached his destination. In front of him, surrounded by a wall, was the same base, striking him with its scale. Lu Shen moved closer to the wall, which seemed simply huge up close, with an entire city behind it. He guessed that such a high wall was built for a reason, but in defense against monsters. There was nothing to do, and the guy went to look for a place where he could get to the base the fastest. Lu climbed into one of the broken places and began to look with amazement at the walls, which were at least 20 meters thick. He couldn't even imagine what kind of monster could break through such a scale of defense. This world was superior not only in all aspects of technology, but also in martial arts. And if such a powerful civilization had fallen at the hands of monsters, what awaited them? Lu noticed one building in the center that didn't look like the others and decided that it must be where the military base or command center was located. He walked a little closer and saw someone's silhouette in the broken window of the building. Looking closer, he could clearly see some kind of creature inside. From all indications, it was clear that it was most likely a zombie, which is very old. As soon as the monster raised its gaze to the guy, he immediately felt a strong aura. At some point, he couldn't even stand on his feet and fell down, shocked by such energy. The fog and streams of flying power emanating from this zombie appeared in front of his eyes for a moment. Lu didn't understand why he was thrown back so much and how this monster had such a huge and terrifying power. He decided not to rush to go inside the base, figuring it was too early for him and leave that for dessert. The decision was made to go take a look around, though the zombies below looked rather harmless. They had snuck in here the same way the guy did and filled the entire area of the military base. Lu Shen decided to start attacking incognito to take the advantage by the effect of surprise. Thus, he distracted the zombie standing in his way and quickly jumped to the right place. Hiding behind one of the fences, he hoped no one heard him and he could continue on his way. Once inside the premises, he saw a room that looked like a normal apartment. Judging by the items left on the table, the owners of this dwelling had no idea that their doom would soon befall them. As Lu walked around and looked around, he noticed one familiar item on the table. It was something like their appraisal ball, only a different shape, but it still seemed to work. Lu Shen decided to check it out and put his hand on it, and in a second, everything lit up with a blue light and started rebooting from sleep mode. A projection of a girl appeared and greeted the Tianheng user politely. The guy was pleasantly delighted by what he saw, as they only had holograms in development. At this moment, it reached him that she was speaking the same language as him. Lu Shen even thought that it was some kind of high-tech automatic translation, because here, the technology has gone far ahead. The girl began to say that she was a product of Tianheng technology, an embedded holographic artificial intelligence of the 16th generation Ellie, and was responsible for controlling the network server of this base. Guy was a little surprised at that statement and asked her to tell him what happened here. Ellie was eager to tell the story of what had happened, but the connection dropped several times. A minute later, everything normalized and many holographic images appeared. There was a detailed retelling of the history of the base with the attack on it and the search for survivors. Lu Shen also deducted that a council had been set up to discuss a further plan of action to deal with the monsters. He noticed that there was a rank 10 master present in the story and realized that they had the same gradation of masters as they did. It was even hard to imagine how unique these masters were in nature. At some point, the history book began to rapidly turn pages and stopped at one episode. Lu Shen saw a simply huge, ferocious monster on the hologram. Next, he saw a large number of monsters attacking the base and its defense against them. He was amazed by the technology and martial arts of this world, which had reached unprecedented heights. Somehow, all this high level of martial skills turned out to be nothing in the end. All those huge, thick walls in the face of the monsters were unable to counteract anything. People from this world even tried to leave Earth, sending their research teams to other galaxies, hoping to find a new home. In any case, none of them ever signaled until the fall of humanity. One thing was abundantly clear. This world was destined to perish. It was also clear that the civilization was incredibly great, so the regret over its disappearance was immense. Lu Shen sat down on the couch and asked Ellie to show him the history of this world. The holographic artificial intelligence happily launched a recreation of this world. Scrolls with records of their former battles and attempts to survive unfolded in front of the guy. Lu Shen became sad that such an advanced civilization could not cope with monsters, and hoped that their experience would help them avoid a similar fate. Here he read about the appearance of rifts in the world, through which unseen creatures from other planets and galaxies had made their way. Then he studied the information about the birth of the first world-famous martial artist and the fact that at the same time, an alliance was created. The boy began to quickly read further, finding more and more similarities, and at some point it hit him. He was reading the history of his world, which meant that it wasn't two different universes, but some sort of future. It was clear now how Ellie knew his language, and the gradation of masters was exactly the same. Everything he saw here now was not the resolution of another world unknown to him. This was his world 10,000 years later, even though it looked like complete nonsense. He even thought it might be a parallel universe, immediately asking Ellie for information on specific people. A search with the name Lu Shen yielded 36 people in the system. The guy found the right year and place of birth, and realized that it was indeed him. The screen said that he died as an ordinary citizen without rank at the age of 28. Lu decided to check one more thing and requested a specific date on the search engine. The system denied access, which required registration, which required him to provide his genetic material. The guy didn't mind giving up a drop of blood, but he didn't know how to obtain it now. While he was pondering this, suddenly a hologram of Ellie flew up to him and took his finger. He was confused and didn't realize what she was going to do by trying to take his finger. But Ellie thus merely took a small bite to make Lu's finger bleed. The system reported that blood had been collected and data processing was underway, while the guy was marveling at such technology. After a second, something like a hologram blinking started, and Lu was afraid it was about to shut down. But Ellie announced that Project Beam was up and running, and the connection to the base's storage began. Everything lit up red, and the connection was successfully completed with permission available. Lu Shen was interested in this Project Beam, which might have something to do with finding another world. New information about him loaded up, saying that he had died at the age of 37 as a 4th rank master with the rank of lieutenant. Lu was shocked that he had somehow managed to change the future and decided to take a closer look. He once again reread all of his accomplishments since high school and was impressed. It pleased him that he did go to university, and afterward he went into the army. There, he served in the Tian'an division and died in a battle in the south at the hands of the enemies. The guy finished the last lines about his demise and no debts to the state. One thing was obvious. If the lad became stronger, he could change the future. His life path to 18 is unchanged, and there are even details about his life now. But in the scale of history, these feats were insignificant and even unnoticeable. Besides, in these 10,000 years, there were still many, many more such smart guys born. Lu Shen realized that wanting to get into history was just pride, so it was worth forgetting about it. The records even included his exact health status and combat skills. Those data, without the help of his dreams using normal techniques, would take him about a year to achieve. But it was impossible to just turn a blind eye to his dream training with the adoption of zombie techniques. In this case, the guy could achieve such results in the very near future. He wasn't satisfied with the fact that he was only 23rd in Bai He according to historical data, so he decided to change that. He wanted everyone to recognize him and his name, and he himself would definitely build the most important thing. That important thing was a better future, which the guy was going to change by becoming stronger. Lu Shen made a promise to himself to prevent the coming end of the world. Zombies and his school buddies flashed before his eyes again, and he promised to save them all. The most important promise was to become the ray of light for all mankind. The boy finally woke up and went downstairs for breakfast where his mom was already serving the table. She noticed her son in his homemade clothes and asked why he hadn't changed yet and if he was even going to go to school. Lu replied that he was allowed to study at home by his teacher, so there was no need to go out. Lu Qinghe, cooling her hot drink, thought that she had never heard of such permission from the school. The boy ate everything quite quickly, and after thanking his mother, he started to get up from the table. He asked his mother to clear the table and clarified that he would go to his room to do his business. Qinghe couldn't help but notice that there was something wrong with her brother, because it was noticeable how much he had changed recently. It was as if he wasn't as dumb as he used to be, suspiciously quiet and strange. The guy had just walked into the room and saw the screen of the phone burning with someone calling. He had gotten a call from Teacher Jun about his scholarship that was ready. The teacher asked the boy to come to his place after lunch and pick it up, hearing words of gratitude on the other end of the line. The martial instructor also inquired why the boy didn't visit the school today. Lu Shen honestly replied that he had very little time to waste. It was certainly difficult for him to explain it, so he simply asked not to ask anything. The kid couldn't afford to fool around anymore, as he had to become the best, so that everyone would be horrified. The only option to improve his abilities as much as possible was resources. For this reason, he needed to get to the heights as fast as possible to find a way to change the future. Lu Shen asked Ellie to display all the different training options on the screen for him. He specified that it looked by the type of notes, manuals, practices, and other things related to martial arts. The system immediately started a search and quickly completed it, finding about 500,000 results. That was too many, so the guy asked to filter the skill information for first-rank martial artists with the most valuable information. Ellie immediately started filtering all the information available in the system. She put restrictions and still got a large number of results, and then she put another filter, sorting almost exactly to the letter. In the end, the filtering finished after a few minutes, finding only 3 results. Lu Shen immediately rushed over to see what appeared on the screen and froze in place in surprise. In front of them were the best martial arts techniques from the past 10,000 years. The first was the Star Hardening Technique, created by one of the members of the 11th-ranked Strongest Masters Alliance, Wang He, and was part of the Beam Plan. The second was the Natural Breathing Technique, also created by Yang Yizhu, a member of the Alliance, and was part of the Beam Plan. And last but not least was the Crystal Vision, created by Duan Yifeng from the same Ray Plan. Lu Shen was simply shocked to see that in front of him was the incredible legacy of the strongest rank 11 masters. It didn't even matter to him that this was just an introduction to the technique because it was already quite a lot. The most interesting thing was that they were all included in Project Beam, and most likely because the people at the top of the Alliance knew about the fate ahead of them. People realized that they could do nothing and left behind the best they had learned in their lives in the hope that someone would come and continue their work, although they could hardly expect that it would not be their successor, but an ancient ancestor. According to the Star Hardening Technique, the human body is arranged like a miniature universe, for even if thoughts are lost, the spirit remains. The blood was purified and the body strengthened, while perfecting the mind and every cell. The next step was to transform each cell into a star of infinite power. It felt like transforming the flowing blood into a river of stars, when everything inside completely changed to a star field. The density of the master's body reached an extreme level, and the defense and strength became unimaginably huge. One could feel the blood inside the body blazing like a star or even an actual star stream. Lu Shen thought it was amazing, as the introductory practice was no different from ordinary morning exercises. But the health status with martial skills here increased a dozen or even hundreds of times. The next guy wanted to master the natural breathing technique he had chosen on the screen. The first part of the introduction of this technique was fire breathing, which could be obtained by maximizing concentration. The most real flames erupted around the guy, enveloping every inch of his body. It felt as if there were countless flames burning in his body. He felt the blood in his veins boil, and this was only the first breathing technique, and there are several more of this different nature. Next, the guy decided to try Crystal Vision, to complete the top 3 martial skills. What Lu Shen had learned about it was that it clears thoughts and strengthens the mind, dealing with the most mysterious part of the practice, spiritual power. He wasn't exactly sure, but he decided that it was the one he needed to practice, and proceeded to do it. It felt like the guy had gotten into his inner world, though it made sense since soul and consciousness were very important to the practice. Lu felt as if he was looking at himself from the outside and realized that a strong-spirited master was never subjected to useless thoughts. Combat power and cultivation speed far surpassed that of a martial artist with a weak will and many desires. It seemed very simple from the outside, but it was completely unclear how to play it out in life. He decided not to bother too much and thought that everything would eventually come with time. At that moment, he was thrown back into reality and felt very tired from these practices, as if he hadn't slept at all. A second later, he smelled some strange, pungent odor, deciding that he was sweating so much. He examined himself from top to bottom and noticed the stains of dirt and sweat. And even though everything happened in the dream, but the body in reality still showed it all in full. Lu Shen decided to take a bath, satisfied that all the practices combined had freed him from the negative energy. He felt that he was making great strides in his training and wanted to create his own pillory after receiving his scholarship. The guy was sure that his power would be legendary with his pills of the future, and he would overturn the entire pharmaceutical market. The next morning, Lu Shen decided to visit his Bai He Institute to visit a combat instructor. Teacher Zhang handed the guy a scholarship card and asked him to warn him in advance about his next visit. Lu thanked Teacher Jun for everything and took the card, giving him his black card. The combat instructor said that if he was busy, he could go, but he had to show up for class at least once a week. He realized that he hadn't seen the guy for only a few days, but he already felt a huge gap between himself and him. Lu Shen really did emanate a strong energy and a stream of powerful force from Lu Shen. The guy walked along the city street and thought about the fact that he finally had money, and he had to urgently solve the issue of body nutrition. He had recipes from the future, and right now it was most effective to make his own supplements. Digging through the lucha base one last time, the guy found the recipe for what suited him best at the moment, and that was vitality serum and bone marrow pills. The simplest herbal concoctions required professional utensils, and a slight difference in heating and dosage could make a big difference in the results, so the guy needed a specially equipped place. Since his wallet was not rubber, it was not practical to buy everything himself, so it was possible to try to rent apothecary equipment. Lu visited the first pharmacy he could find, and when he asked, the owner just laughed and said that the produce department was the heart of any pharmacy. The owner thought the guy just wanted to know their secret prescriptions and told him that no one would ever let him inside in his life. He quickly kicked him out and slammed the doors right in his face, yelling at the guy to get out immediately. So Lu went around to 7 more pharmacies, and everywhere he heard the same thing, realizing that it was simply unrealistic to pull this off. He had already bought all the herbs he needed, and even with a stockpile to create a serum. There should have been about $30,000 on the scholarship card, but in fact, there was almost 80, which was probably additional sponsorship. He was getting desperate and decided that if he still couldn't find a lab, he'd have to order something primitive off the internet and try to make something on it. Lu walked across one more street and stopped, not realizing where the pharmacy had come from. He decided that the idea of opening his own place in a hellhole was a bit odd. The guy went inside and said hello, but no one answered him or even paid attention to him. Some weird guy was sitting behind the counter of the drugstore and was stuck on something on his phone. Lu started to say what he needed, but the salesman interrupted him abruptly and told him to choose what he needed and come over to pay for it. The guy also warned Lu that it would be impossible to run away and not pay because there were cameras everywhere. Lu didn't like this attitude because in other pharmacies, despite the rude behavior, he was at least interested in the purpose of the visit. But here he was, not interested in him at all. He quickly looked at the guy's phone, seeing a photo of some girls there. Lu Shen immediately grabbed the phone and smashed it, finally managing to get his attention. The guy shouted swear words and threats at Lu in a frenzy. Lu Shen leaned behind the counter towards the guy and looked at him with his fierce gaze with lightning in his eyes. The guy jumped away from him in wild consternation and began to ask what he had to offer. Lu Shen started to say that he had come to ask something and started talking about the production department, but the guy didn't immediately want to answer. He smiled and politely said that if there was such a department, he would love to make one deal. The salesman led Lu Shenyu inside the pharmacy down a long hallway and stopped at one of the iron doors. Before entering, he blocked the way and stopped the guy, letting him know that wasn't all. The salesman began to talk about the fact that they had an agreement and the guy should pay him $500 for an hour, and if he stayed less than that, he would pay the same amount more, and he had a maximum of 3 hours. Lu Shen understood everything without any hints, holding out the card in front for premature payment. The salesman got all glowing and let the guy into the production department, waving cheerfully and wishing him good luck. Lu Shen changed into his medical uniform and prepared for his first creation. The first thing to do was to start properly processing the raw materials on which the end result depended. He took out a green lizard, which he placed in a special solution to separate the scales from it, and added a neutralizer to be mixed to a certain concentration afterwards and stored at a constant temperature. The next step was to liquefy the moonstone using a laser emitter where visible light is tuned to a certain wavelength. The material is split to a fluid liquid state and cooled down behind the assembly process. And at the end, 30 grams of petrified paper tree root was sliced, which was impossibly strong. It was important to keep strict control of the dosage and in the processing to adjust the chemical properties after the mixing process, which is done in the right proportions and order. The end product of all these steps was the very same life force serum. He still couldn't believe that he had succeeded in obtaining the serum that would be invented 10,000 years later the first time, though he did realize that it was too early to judge and he should try it out. Removing the mask from his face, he took one of the vials and quickly drank its contents. For some reason, there was no taste and no sensation was felt. For a moment, Lu Shen thought it was a complete failure, but after a second, something started to happen. His entire body trembled, his eyes swam in front of him, and the sudden pain in his entire body caused him to fall to the floor. The sensation was unbearable. It was as if the blood inside had boiled and exploded at the same time. He lay on the floor for a while, sighing heavily. Lu got up and was surprised by this adverse reaction, although the life force lost during the training was instantly replenished with reserve. He realized that it was powerful enough to do no harm to the body, and it was also a powerful tonic to improve blood circulation. The serum also had the added benefits of increasing skin density, whitening skin, moisturizing skin, and narrowing pores. He only had time to think that this was part of the martial arts world of the future when he heard a loud knock on the door. Lu opened the door abruptly and became serious, saying that he had asked not to be disturbed while he was working. The salesman became horrified and started yelling that there was no time to explain anything because his boss's wife had returned before the appointed time and he had to rush out. Leaving her car in the parking lot outside the pharmacy, the long-legged girl walked to the pharmacy. She quickly went inside and headed with a box to one of the offices. In her box were many different tubes with different colored contents. The girl was going through something for a while, and after taking a vial with green contents, she quickly drank from it. She quickly lost her temper, as what she had just drunk didn't even qualify as a tonic drink, let alone any medicinal properties. The girl looked at the TV screen, where there was a newscast of the week that was running, which was about martial arts skills. After that, an advertisement for pills for real men began, which were highly recommended for purchase. The girl thought about the fact that as the martial arts industry was changing, so was the medical industry, especially in the field of pharmacology, and new and improved remedies were being developed every day, while old ones were being lost for lack of use. The reason why her family became bankrupt lay in the fact that they were conservative and did not use anything new. The old remedies that were still sitting on their shelves were already old and had long been uncompetitive in the market. There was no way she could find a new recipe, which meant that the family business her father had passed on to her would soon fail. Since there were no more ideas, the girl decided to consult with old pharmacists, remembering about an old man from a neighboring town, and went to him. On her way, she met a salesman who nervously began to say that he hadn't expected her to come. He kept mumbling something and talking some nonsense about her early return. The boy was crazy about Mrs. Hale, thinking she was a beauty queen, though quite cold and calculating, but he knew he would never leave her. He began to dream that someday they would be together forever and have the kind of life only written about in novels. The landlady called out loudly to a guy named Ma Fei, snapping him out of his silly reverie. The girl noticed the dirty robe and started yelling how he dared someone to use her private lab. On one hand, he was looking at her dreamily, but on the other, he was horrified at what was happening. Ma Fei tried to smooth things over somehow, but Madame said that he may not come here anymore. She threw the robe into the trash in a rage and spoke out about how angry she was at the guy, Mrs. He resented the fact that she now had to re-sanitize the entire inventory and also wash and wipe the table, noticing that someone else had touched the activator with the laser controllers. She then noticed the scales of a green lizard in the activator, thinking that it was unwise to do so, as it would remove all the most valuable items. The girl thought that this man wanted to develop something of his own production, but it requires a huge knowledge in the pharmacological field. In addition to all this, requires a huge financial backing, which was clearly not there. It still pissed her off that some stranger had just walked into someone else's pharmacy and scattered everything around. She didn't know what else to expect from today when she suddenly noticed some kind of vial on the floor. She was very interested in the color and smell of the serum, and she recognized some of the ingredients, finding the combination quite entertaining. Mrs. He tried to remember what it reminded her of, but no similar recipes came to mind. Interest rose above safety, and she tasted the rest of the way. For what seemed like a few seconds, there was some sort of activation of the serum. In just a moment, her mind was filled with incredible energy, and her body felt as if it had become stronger. Ma Fei sadly left the pharmacy and thought about how the guy had set him up, and he shouldn't have taken money from him. Most of all, he was sad that he would never see Mrs. He again, dreaming of meeting her at least one more time. Just as he was thinking about it, he saw Madame He running towards him in the distance. The girl was trying to catch up with the guy, shouting at him to stop as she had a few questions. Ma Fei got so upset by this that he almost cried, quickly stopping. He started yelling to her that he couldn't live without her either, and had always dreamed of being together with her. The boy even rushed over to hug the girl, but was quickly brought back to reality. Madame grabbed Ma Fei by the collar and began to demand that he immediately tell her who was in her lab. She also added that if he found who was there, she would not only put him back to work, but also remove his salary. Ma Fei couldn't utter a word due to the intense nervous tension, and after calming down a bit, he informed her that he had his number. The girl immediately snatched the phone from the guy's hands and began to frantically dial the number. She realized that this remedy was dozens of times more effective than any other supplement, and this drug was simply world-class, so she could easily enrich herself on it. The girl decided that she had finally found something incredible, and this was her chance for salvation. Meanwhile, Lu Shen was already at home and practicing again. He was trying to comprehend the inner spiritual power to find a balance between techniques from reality and the future world. At some point, the guy finished practicing and exhaled deeply. He knew that the development of human potential was so great that it was hardly believable. At this rate, he could turn into a real star, but without the natural breathing technique, the body's recovery wouldn't be as effective. He had more vitality, and the effects of the potion were taking their toll, and with his current physique, he could consume 2 jars a day, and he had 12 to spare. He knew that he would have to make his next batch in 6 days, so he headed towards the phone, which had been ringing non-stop for several times now. Lu Shen finally went to the phone to see who was pushing for him so persistently. Mrs. He greeted him and started gibbering about who she was and that she had seen the medicine he had left in her lab, offering to work together. Lu Shen offered to meet her in a week and hung up on her, which of course, Mrs. He didn't expect, but there was nothing to do. Madam. He hoped that the guy would agree to see her soon, but it didn't happen, so she got angry and rushed to Ma Fei with a request. She started shouting that from now on, he would be responsible for finding this man, and the sooner he found him the better, and for every day he was ahead of their meeting schedule, she would give him 10,000. Although Ma Fei was scared and discouraged, but he was able to concentrate when it came to money. After all, the mistress always kept her word. At some point, he decided to ask if she had made a mistake in choosing the man. The boy began to explain that the man who had asked him to use the lab was just a teenager, a regular student, and somehow didn't look much like the master the mistress was talking about. Those words seemed to take the girl by surprise, because then there was no way it could fit in her mind. She was even more interested in the mysterious identity of this genius who independently managed to create something incredible. At this time, Lu Shen had already fallen into the dream world, where he was once again fighting monsters. With one powerful blow, he was able to blow away the head of a zombie that had flown backwards. This same head was caught by another monster and was already looking directly at the guy, hoping for a fight. Lu Shen immediately noticed it and prepared to attack, thinking of the best technique to do so. As it turned out, the guy himself was looking for this zombie to massacre, as he was clearly from the ranks of the military. The monster was quite strong and powerful, which was why it was Lu Shen's current target. The guy rushed forward with his rank 1 martial arts skills to practice them on the zombie. He had already found out before that the monster was a rank 4 master, so it was interesting to see if he could defeat it, and if so, how fast. Lu Shen quickly reached the closest possible distance with the monster and saw a fist displayed towards him. This didn't stop the guy, but instead gave him the goal to move as fast and strong as possible, so he took this powerful punch. Lu Shen was well aware that the zombie was twice as strong as him, and he wouldn't last long at this rate. At this time, the monster was preparing for its next attack and used the star-tempering technique to replenish its energy reserve. The clotted blood, which was the zombie's main fluid, boiled and began to spill all over its body. Lu Shen didn't waste any time, and at this moment, he pounced at the monster with a devastating blow. The one-armed zombie fell down and was immobilized for a short time, having lost its power at the very beginning of its infusion. The guy flew back on the attack, giving his opponent no chance of victory or survival. The final and crushing blow was delivered by the breathing technique, completely destroying the monster. In just a moment, the immobilized body of the zombie was already lying on the ground, searching for the last spirit with Lu Shen's energy absorption. It was even kind of ironic that this monster, a former soldier, had died in battle once again, defending his city. Lu Shen decided for himself that this was not just a monster to level up, but a hero who deserved respect. The guy paid tribute to the once fallen soldier and pronounced that the hero's soul was immortal. He also noticed that when he was alive, this soldier was no less than rank 5. It was evident even from his strong and huge arms alone. And if it wasn't for the lack of one arm and intelligence, he would have had to fight relying solely on his body's fighting instincts, though even then the guy would have been defeated. He had been practicing star hardening, natural breathing, and crystal vision for almost a week now, and with the help of spiritual practices and the drug he had invented, he was able to advance far, and the absorbed knowledge of combat was also stinging. Using secret techniques of breathing and star tempering, he could unleash a force several dozens or even hundreds of times stronger than his normal one. Lu went farther away from the battle site and came across the habitat of a small pack of zombies. Everyone was of course preparing for battle, and the guy was no exception, taking hits from all sides at once. He used one new technique with the unification of all the techniques, which he called star power, flying apart for a few dozen meters and hitting absolutely everything in this radius. Lu Shen, after increasing his combat power, reappeared at the dojo center to evaluate his status and combat skills, where he was politely greeted by the girl behind the counter. The guy inquired if there was a spare room to use the strength evaluation machine. The girl coquettishly asked him what he was doing here, since he had an exam coming up, and he couldn't increase his strength in a short period of time. Lu replied that he would increase his strength at least a little, but he thought that it took months or even years for ordinary students, and even the most elite schools assess strength once a month, to which the girl offered him a free room and wished him good luck. The guy knew for a fact that if he hadn't evolved so fast, he wouldn't have even come to test his strength to look at 0 results. He placed his hand on the glowing orb and received a health status result of 15.5 units, which was simply a huge progress and a surprise, as the numbers exceeded even a rank 2 martial artist. On the other hand, it was quite logical since he had used the best techniques of the future years with the most advanced tonic, and he was rather surprised if there wasn't such an increase. Next, he moved on to testing his combat skills on the evaluation machine. Lu hit the mannequin partway down the table in such a way that it seemed as if blue sparks flew from it. A second later, the result appeared on the evaluation machine's screen. The guy's combat skills equaled 3,137, which was a full 2 times higher than normal. Lu Shen thought about the fact that this was a very ordinary strike, and what could be if he put all his strength into it, and if the scores continued to rise, it would mean that he had no limits to his combat power development. He decided to test his theory right now, and prepared for the next strike. This time, the guy used an amalgamation of all the techniques, which was called star power, and dealt a powerful blow to the machine. After satisfying his curiosity, the guy got out and headed towards the exit, where the girl behind the counter was already waiting for him. She was curious to know the guy's result, so she asked if everything had been successful and if he was satisfied with himself. Lu Shen was, to put it mildly, satisfied with his results, but he did not want to talk about it in detail, so he just nodded cheerfully. The girl wished him good luck and more luck in the upcoming exam. The boy thanked her and went away on his own, waving back to the girl. She didn't notice other people near her and shifted out loud, saying that this guy was very cool and so mysterious. Next to her was the daughter of Crimson River Martial Arts School's headmaster Ni Shuang and her younger brother. Ni Shuang cheerfully said that she had only taken a couple seconds to the recuperating bathhouse with her brother, and she had already met the love of her life. The girl behind the counter, named Shaolin, started to deny it, but little brother Ni started to say that a pretty face can't defend against monsters, so only fighting skills are valued in their society, and this guy looks like a child from an ordinary family. The sister knew very well that her boyfriend drank tonics before he even started school. That's why his performance was always above his peers, because resources in their world played a key role. The gap between the kid and his peers was getting bigger with every day of his training, turning him into a vile, arrogant type. Ni made a sharp kick to her brother's head and told him to never dare to compare himself to kids from ordinary families again. The boy instantly grew a lump, and his sister added that if he was so eager to rant about his accomplishments, then let him go train. The boy quickly changed his face, and in a pitiful voice began to ask for a glimpse of the guy's results. He pressed on the fact that the guy looked a little older than him, and he was just wondering if he had worked so hard for nothing because he didn't know what to expect from the exams in the future. Ni Shuang agreed, but warned her brother not to get too cocky, since this is just an ordinary guy. Shoulin held out the tablet to Ni and informed her that the guy was the only one at the test today, so his results would be first. Ni Shuang opened the results and looked to see who it even was, and after a second, she froze in surprise and shock. Even her younger brother fell to the floor with a pee and assumed that this device was just broken. Shaolin said that this was definitely ruled out, as all the equipment had undergone a regular check yesterday. Nai Shuang realized that the result was reliable, and this guy was not as ordinary as they thought. She started to ask Shaolin to immediately give her his address and phone number, but the guy was not a member of the club, so the girl quickly ran to find a free employee to find Lu Shen. The girl began to quickly research about the unknown person, making sure that he was indeed a high school student from an ordinary family. She looked at his resume and, looking at his photo, promised herself to make sure to find him. Lu Shen left the cab car and listened to the driver laughing loudly and calling him a nice guy, promising to introduce him to her daughter next time. Lu thought he could tell this hardy man that he was going to the Martial Arts Association to take the second-rank master exam. But, in that case, there was a chance that the man would have thought the guy was in over his head and dropped him off at the nearest intersection. Right in front of the entrance, a guy jumped out in front of Lu's nose, shouting about how he had trained long and hard, and his combat skills still showed a score of less than 150, which was simply impossible. The guys standing nearby watching this picture were talking amongst themselves about how this association had the most accurate custom-made equipment, so there could be no mistakes there. Lu Shen liked what he heard about the association's precision equipment, as he had long wanted to test his real strength. The guy went to the receptionist and asked how he could take the martial arts master exam, and was given a form to fill out his details. After filling out the form, the girl sent him to a special room for the passing test, and Yadu left. Opening the door to the hall where everyone was filling out the forms, Lu Shen saw a huge crowd of people waiting for their turn. He didn't want to waste any time at all, and he was already thinking about what he could think of to speed up the whole process. Some guys noticed one beautiful girl and began to discuss how much she could be capable of since she showed up for the test. Opposite them stood a girl, not much older than them, but even in her posture there was confidence and strength. Lu noticed that most of the people in line were about 25 years old, and he was a snot compared to them, but the girl looked even younger. At that moment, a huge candidate showed up for the exam, not even able to fit through the doorway. He walked and everyone gave way to him, although the bulky man politely asked them to move aside and even apologized. A married couple showed up for the exam to have the husband enter the path of a martial arts master, thus beginning a new phase in their lives. The bully gently pushed the man away to walk further forward, but it seemed like a strong push for the man. When the man turned to see who was asking him to give way, he was horrified for a moment. As the bulky man walked ahead of everyone, the crowd behind him marveled at his size and physicality. The wife of the man in the suit did not keep silent and rushed to accuse the bulky man of skipping the queue while they had been here for half a day. The woman could not calm down and continued to hurl accusations until she was stopped by the attendant on duty, who said that it was Zhao Changfeng, who had come on a ticket because he had to be the first in the exam. As it turned out, this bulky man was testing for a master as high as the 3rd rank. The woman froze in shock after hearing this and didn't utter another word. The girl in the crowd thought that this was very rare, and there were only a little more than a dozen people with this rank in their city. Lu Shen, more than anyone else, knew that in the world of martial artists, power reigned supreme, because whoever was strongest had privileges. The person on duty gave Zhao Changfeng permission to proceed with the test, starting with a health status check. The woman was still offended and told her husband that there was nothing special about this bulky man, and he was just an ordinary person like the rest of them. But her opinion was forced to change when the glowing ball of light showed a result of 107 units. The woman exclaimed in horror, for she had never before seen a status exceeding 100 units. The score was really big, and the duty officer asked the bully to move on to the next stage, to the combat skills evaluation machine. The thug hit the mannequin with all his might, so that a whirlwind went up in the building and nearly blew out the windows. Almost everyone inside fell to the floor, and only a few were still trying to stand on their feet. Lu Shen felt a huge flow of power, but it didn't hit him at all, so he stood perfectly still without moving. The scoreboard of the machine showed a combat skill score of almost 11,000. The clerk on duty was shocked by Zhao Changfeng's result and congratulated him for obtaining a third-rank martial artist master recognized by the Martial Arts Association and informed him that he would receive a monthly payment of $30,000 from now on. The thug quickly glanced back and noticed that Lu Shen and the girl remained standing on their feet after his strike and felt the power emanating from them. The girl was delighted and frightened at the same time from such a monstrous strength of the thug. After all, such stats scattered all the feathermen in a blink of an eye. Lu Shen was also amazed and realized for himself what kind of strength a third-rank master should have. The girl was confused after hearing such words from the guy because he was able to stand on his feet, but for some reason, he acted like a weakling. Lu Shen decided to take advantage of the situation and approached the clerk on duty and asked to test him right now. He clarified that there was no one in line anyway, and it wouldn't take long. The duty officer didn't understand how the guy could remain so calm after what he had seen, and even asked to be next, but he said he gave his permission to go through. He walked behind the guy as he put his hand on the glowing ball and told him to be calm and do everything as usual. The screen showed Lu Shen's health status result of almost 16 units, which was in no way expected by the clerk standing behind him. The girl was once again shocked, because the guy looked 18 years old, and with such a high reading, he clearly had tonic rather than blood flowing through his veins. Gramila Zhao was also impressed with the results of a guy claiming to be a rank 2 master at such a young age. The clerk on duty once again began to admonish and told the guy to ignore the consequences of Zhao's strike and could test his martial skills as many times as he wanted without embarrassment. But Lu Shen didn't need anyone's advice and replied that he would figure it all out perfectly well on his own. He added that once was enough for him, and after gathering all his strength together, he gave the car a permissive strike. The thug and the girl, as well as all the others, froze with expectation, for they felt what a mighty force it was. At the same moment, there was a loud crack and the glass shattered. Everyone watched in horror, especially the shattered glass behind the evaluation machine. Lu Shen's combat skills score of 15,500 appeared on the screen. He realized that the concentration of energy in a single strike, combined with star power and natural breath, had created something. It all allowed him to increase his combat power 10 times the standard level, and that was the beauty of martial arts techniques. The clerk on duty in bewilderment began to congratulate the guy for passing the first-rank martial arts master exam, even though his strength completely surpassed that of second and even third-rank masters. He apologized to the guy for not being able to give him another grade right now, but he would definitely report him to the top leadership of the association, because such talented geniuses should not be allowed to disappear. Without waiting for an answer from the guy, the duty officer was already rushing somewhere and shouted that he would do it right now, and let him be sure. The answer will be satisfactory. Lu Shen was even confused by this behavior of the duty officer and was left standing alone, deciding that he could definitely give a free pass after this. At this moment, the guy felt someone standing behind him, guessing who it could be by the force coming from him. Lu turned around and saw the thug extend his hand to him as a sign of greeting. The bulky man first introduced himself as Zhao Changfeng and waited for the guy's response. Lu Shen also extended his hand after saying his name, and the thug felt how immense the boy's strength really was. At the same second, a bunch of reporters appeared from nowhere and ran up to Lu Shen, asking him to answer a few questions and take a picture. The guy jumped out of the clutches of the bloodthirsty photographers and interviewers like crazy and rushed away to the exit. In front of the Martial Arts Association building, there was a girl standing in front of the building, worried that her friend Yang still hadn't come out. The girl turned out to be Lu Shen's sister, Qinghe, and a couple of other girlfriends who were waiting for their buddy with slight excitement. They were almost certain that a genius like Yan would definitely get the first rank when a very familiar person came out of the building. Qinghe took a closer look and recognized this guy as her brother, very surprised at the same time. Lu Shen also noticed little sister and immediately approached her, asking her what she was doing here. Qinghe acted like the older one and started to say that she was the one who should ask him about it. After all, he was the one who didn't go to school and slept in his room every day, so he should explain himself. The boy could admit that she knew about school, but he couldn't understand how she knew that he slept a lot, though he didn't talk about it and just answered that he came by on personal business. The girls immediately rushed to tell him that they had come to support Yang Yuan's friend, but they were all his sister's classmates. One girl even said that he was very handsome and not at all like what Qinghe had told about him. Qinghe was furious at such insolence from her friends and started shouting at them, trying to change the subject. Lu Shen said goodbye to everyone and said that he had to go, giving her sister a final pat on the hair like when she was a child. As soon as her brother walked away, the girl immediately attacked her friends, who turned out to be traitors, saying everything she had told them about him. At this moment, they noticed their sister Yang Yuan coming out of the association and rushed towards her. The girls pounced on her with questions, to which Yang sighed sadly and replied that something unforeseen had happened and the exams had been postponed until at least noon. The girls were shocked by what they heard, because what could have happened to postpone the exams in the association itself? Shan began to tell them that one monster, or rather a guy around her age, had a high health status score and combat power even higher than a third-rank master. Until now, the girl had thought she had a good score, but after the guy's results, she realized that there was no point in the exam. The girls were shocked even more and wondered who the guy was. Yan started to quickly remember the guy's name and finally said, Lu Shen. Qinghe froze in surprise and continued shock, unable to believe what she heard. She pictured her older brother, who had only been sleeping and eating for days and couldn't realize it in any way. Suddenly, there was some running around outside the association building, and the group standing nearby decided that the people in black suits were looking for someone, and if they found someone, nothing good would come of it. Lu Shen, at this moment, the Crimson River School where he was being tested, called, but he didn't feel like answering at all. Immediately, the next call was from Ma Fei from Mrs. He's pharmacy, but this time, too, he didn't want to talk to anyone. He thought of getting rid of them, as he could get a lot of money for the medicines himself, and how profitable a partnership with these guys was for him was yet to be seen. He plunged back into the future world and launched Ellie to update the information. Greeting the holographic artificial intelligence, the guy requested information about himself. His bio popped up on the screen, which had fundamentally changed since the last time he had seen it. Lu Shen had not even suspected that such a thing was possible, but now he was personally convinced of it. He began to read in detail at what age he entered, what he graduated from, and where he served. Then he read the information at what age he tried to get the rank of 7th rank, but was unsuccessful. The final stage was his death at the age of 87 from a beast attack. At this moment, the guy realized that the future could be changed, but what he saw today was not enough. Lu Shen recalled the monster attack and realized that these small changes meant nothing to the future world. In order to change the fate of the human race and set the direction of the world for the next 10,000 years, much more power and a higher rank was needed. He also began to realize that both the 7th and 8th rank would be too little. If he wanted to change the fate of this world, he had to reach the top. Although the chance of that was not great, but he had chosen this path himself and would not turn from it. Some person was diligently writing out hieroglyphics on paper, drawing out each one very carefully. It was the president of the Xiao Martial Arts Association, who believed that good handwriting had a high spiritual power. He was having a conversation with someone via video call, from where the interlocutor advised him to also train people as good as writing. Xiao Yuehei only laughed and asked Leader Lao not to joke on him like that. He also added that he hadn't had any heirs from the martial artist lineage for a long time. Since they didn't have the resources, anyone with talent would leave for the capital. The president, unfortunately, had no way to influence this, and then the leader sternly addressed him. Lao informed him that very soon it would be time to open the training camp. It was a shame for them that with such a big organization, they couldn't send anyone to it. Leader Lao lastly said that this time, no matter what, the president should save face for the association. President Xiao was too angry with this conversation because he wanted to do it himself, but he couldn't do anything about it. He knew that no one needed this spiritual writing for nothing without resources. At that moment, his secretary burst into his office and started yelling something about an exam. The president did not yet know what she had come with and wondered why she had not even knocked. The secretary said there was no time to explain because she was obliged to report urgently what had happened in the exam. She shouted that a teenager of 18 years old with second-rank skill and combat power up to 16,000 had appeared. The president was shocked by what he heard and snatched the tablet out of the girl's hands. He wanted to see the video of this amazing guy's exam as soon as possible. On the tablet screen was Lu Shen in all his fighting glory preparing to strike. The president quickly recognized the perfect fist-fighting technique. The secretary didn't quite understand what he meant, and he explained to her that there were no more than 10 such people in the world at his age. Xiao had no way of realizing that a guy could have such a health status, and even with such tremendous fighting power. What shocked him the most was the information that the guy was a teenager from an ordinary family. He started shouting like crazy that it was definitely it, because there was no other explanation. The secretary was already doubting the adequacy of what was happening, because it was as if the president had been replaced. Xiao picked up the girl and began to spin, shouting that such a gifted master is one in a million. He kept circling her, saying how lucky he was to have met him. The president said that among those who practice martial arts, there are those who have a unique talent. In such people, a power beyond the imagination of an ordinary person is awakened. After awakening, one's status rises sharply and special abilities appear, and such people are called gifted martial arts masters. The president quickly gathered himself and said that he would go to this guy's house to personally thank his parents. At the same time, younger brother Ni also found Lu Shen's address and phone number. He ran over and started reporting all the information he could find out. The younger brother wondered why his sister was so concerned about this guy. The girl didn't want to say anything and only quickly dialed someone's number. After she finished, she commanded her brother to go and buy something expensive and suitable for Lu Shen's parents and sister. She was glad that she had finally found it, and her brother thought that her sister was looking for a husband. Meanwhile, Lu Shen himself was in his room meditating. His sister knocked on their room and asked to come downstairs. The guy thought that he hadn't heard Qinghe call him brother in a long time. Lu Shen quickly went down to the room and saw two strangers there. His mother, at a loss, called out to the boy to get to know the guests better. The first to introduce himself was the president of the Martial Arts Association, Xiao Yuhei. Lu Shen was pleasantly surprised by his visit, as he knew about his martial abilities. The president himself praised the guy as calm and collected. The mother introduced the girl Ni Shuang from the Crimson River Martial Arts School. The girl politely said hello and reminded him that they had recently seen each other at school. The guy wasn't exactly sure if he remembered her, but he politely agreed. The first to address Lu Shen was the president of the Martial Arts Association. He informed him that he was giving him a rank 2 master badge even though his skills were far beyond rank 3, as well as giving him a monthly allowance at the rate of a rank 3 master, and on top of that, the association had given him a cash prize of 1 million. The parents were shocked at what was happening, and were even afraid to utter a single word. The boy politely thanked the association and the president personally for their support. But he was not stupid at all and asked what the association wanted in return. The president even liked that the guy was actually very capable. He took out a black envelope from his pocket and said that he wanted him to participate in a training camp in Dongning province. Ni Shuang immediately jumped up from her seat upon hearing about this offer. This was the same camp for gifted martial artists. She knew that this place also ruined talents, which was what happened to her elder brother. He was a man of great ambition, but after returning from the camp, he was completely broken. The girl began to say that there was no need to take such a big risk. The president confirmed the girl's words, saying that there were risks, but that this was the best place for real talent. No matter how much he wished it, the choice was still up to Lu Shen himself. The president languidly waited for the guy to respond to his proposal. Lu Shen stood up and took the envelope from the president's hands, saying that he was right. The guy also believed that true talents should improve themselves. The president said that he would pick him up in a couple days, but now he wouldn't bother them anymore. In parting, he said that he would see Mr. Lu Shen in a couple of days. While everyone was seeing off the president of the association with a glance, Lu inquired about the purpose of Ni's visit. He said that it was her turn to tell him why she came to see him. The girl looked straight into the guy's eyes and blushed visibly from embarrassment. Ni thought about the fact that he was much more handsome than he looked in his portfolio photo. The girl coughed and said that she came here with an invitation to their Crimson Rivers Martial Arts School. She also specified that he would be awarded the title of honor student, which confused the guy. Nai began to explain that with such a title, he might not attend school at all and could only do training. The girl was aiming to increase the prestige of her school in Baihe City. Lu Shen knew the answer to this proposal in advance, saying that he wasn't interested in any of this. He explained that despite all the perks, he didn't want to be famous. Lu said he could only become a member of their dojo anonymously, and no other way. The girl tried to explain to him that the title is the highest honor of their school. She also added that she could pay his salary of $100,000 today. The mother and father were beyond happy, shocked, and proud of their son. As soon as the girl left, they pounced on the boy with questions about what it all meant. His parents and sister interrupted each other, not letting Lu get a word in edgewise. The boy said it was all true, and his mother wouldn't have to work nights anymore. He turned to his father next, saying that he could do no more hard work so his back could rest. They ran up to hug him, and he said he would earn his own money from now on. Meanwhile, there was a languid wait in the pharmacy of Mrs. He's House of Goodness. The pharmacy owner was nervously biting her fingernails and thinking about the fact that it had been over a week and the guy still hadn't shown up. She'd reviewed the entire list of registered pharmacists, but still hadn't found anything. The tonic that Lou had made impressed her so much that she couldn't stop thinking about it. This drug outperformed most Tier 3 drugs. The most interesting thing was that the consumables for it were the most common and cheapest. Ma Fei walked into the pharmacy, and the madam began to nervously ask where he had been walking for so long. Ma Fei was scared and confused at the same time because he came with news. He swallowed his saliva nervously and informed the mistress that he had finally found the guy. "Madam." He immediately jumped up and started asking about what he had found out. At this moment, the girl's screen was broadcasting from the last exam that Ma Fei had pointed out, saying that it was him. On the computer monitor, the latest news of Baihe City was streaming, with a close-up of Lu Shen. Many interesting things were reported about him, including the fact that he was a student. Mrs. He was simply shocked by this statement, for she had no idea that he was just an ordinary teenager. Meanwhile, somewhere in the Shuhai forest, where Mount Guhuhu stood and was usually sepulchral silent, something happened. Above the river by the mountain, a white dove was calmly and measuredly flying somewhere. The bird, accustomed to peace and quiet, stopped at the unexpected noise. Lu Shen rushed past it with the speed of lightning in an unknown direction. He mixed star power with the technique of practicing movements for acceleration, which he successfully achieved. All of this helped him reach a new level, and he called this speed cloud running. He came running to the edge of the cliff and stopped to admire the sunrise. The guy finally realized how natural breathing was actually used. With each breath, energy was drawn from the air, which simply served as a constant source of energy. At this time, there was a constant opening of the body's potential, and one could feel everything around him. He even felt that he could change everything existing between heaven and earth. His power thickly enveloped everything within a radius of a few dozen meters with a dense fog. He finally came out of the energy practices and realized that he had succeeded. His level had greatly increased, and his star power had been refined. He had originally come to this mountain to gather pill materials, but he had gotten a great breakthrough in his training. The herb he collected had not yet been discovered as a valuable medicinal material in his era. The rest of the raw materials for the serum were waiting for him at the very foot of Guhu Mountain. He thought that now was a very convenient chance to test his cloud running. Lu Shen didn't even have time to accelerate before he reached the foot of the mountain in a second. The guy approached the merchant and said that he had ordered herbs from him and had come to pick them up. The merchant chuckled and replied that everything had been ready for a long time and was waiting for him. He began to list all the materials the boy needed. Lu was already holding out to the merchant the amount they had agreed on, but the merchant stopped him. The merchant began to say that now the raw materials had become more expensive, but that was not all. He said that the guy had to buy everything the merchant had at that time. Lu Shen did not agree on such a thing and asked him how much he should do it now. The merchant, with a cheeky grin, began to say that the boy could have already guessed it himself, as he was not a local and came to them, which means to follow their rules. Other guys, the merchant's buddies, with sharp daggers and evil intentions, began to come out from behind the trees, specifying that the parents should have warned the kid not to go to unfamiliar places alone. Lu Shen was calm as usual and only laughed at the fact that the brigands wanted to take everything from him by force. The merchant advised the guy not to do anything stupid, as his brothers were excellent fighters, and even the police wouldn't help him, as no one would come here. They sincerely thought that they could remain unpunished in this forest and do whatever they wanted. The bandits had already moved to attack, and the merchant asked the guy not to resist, as he did not guarantee him a favorable outcome in such a case. Lu Shen decided to start small and simply leaned his hand on the rock, which trembled and split into small pieces at the spot where he had made his mark. The bandits stopped at the same second and froze in place at what they saw, feeling frightened. The guy took his hand away from the rock, leaving a deep indentation there, and said that, in that case, he had one question. Lu Shen inquired as to whose rules they would now play by. The bandits noticed that there was only dust on the guy's arm, and there wasn't even a single scratch. They quickly realized that the advantage was not on their side, and they threw themselves on their knees, talking about how wrong they were. Lu Shen asked them to stop the circus and told them that he would take what he needed and leave, to which the brigands started yelling to take everything for free. Lastly, the guy admonished the bandits that his parents had taught him to conduct business honestly and transparently. The brigands shouted with glee that they would definitely change and become completely different people, while Lu thought about the fact that he really wanted to pay them, but they refused. The merchant, looking after Lu, thought that if the students had become such monsters, they really needed to find a new job. The boy returned home safely, and the next day, the president of the Martial Arts Association sent the promised car to pick him up. He was brought to Dongning Province, where the training camp that President Xiao had told him about was located. As Lu Xun walked towards it, he thought that this training camp looked more like a military base. He noticed the master badges on the guys standing next to him and was surprised that it had to be worn on him. The guy remembered that his badge had been put in a place of honor by his mom, and he of course forgot to take it from there, hoping it wasn't a big deal. One of the guys on duty came up to him and asked why he was alone and who he was, to which Lu replied that he was a Baihe guy and a little late. The guys standing nearby started talking amongst themselves about how one participant from Baihe City had already arrived, and this one didn't even have his badge with him and was probably added to the list at the very last moment. The duty officer looked at the list and then remembered that this was the same guy that the president of the Martial Arts Association was talking about. The guys started laughing about the fact that the guy had gotten here on goodwill since the president himself had taken care of him, but the duty officer told them all to shut up immediately. The duty officer began to tell him to go with the others to the camp for the initiation ceremony and to leave his things here, as they would be taken away later. The guy was surprised that the entrance to the camp was done in groups, which was not exactly like a normal ceremony. As he walked forward, he noticed some huge chains attached to the floor. After everyone entered the camp, these chains lifted a special door and closed the entrance. The boys panicked and started yelling that they were locked in while the duty officer tried to calm them down. He began to explain that their task was to find a way out on the other side of the corridor, and if they succeeded, they would pass the camp entrance exam, and if they failed, they would go home. The boys became even more indignant about the fact that they were only warned about the initiation ceremony and not about the exam. As they shouted and voiced their grievances, they did not notice that the floor beneath them began to fail, and they flew straight down. This was part of the entrance exam where they found themselves at the point of beginning to pass. Some were complaining that it was like traps from ancient times, some were screaming that it was painful, and some were trying to figure out where they had been thrown. Of all these frantic guys, only Lu Xun was completely calm and was looking around carefully. The guy decided to use one of his abilities and closed his eyes. A second later, he saw everything around him, not as it appeared at first glance, but much deeper. Lu quickly realized that it wasn't that simple since he could see some shadows. For this, he was thankful for his crystal vision ability. The guy named Lin Xiao said that it was all a bore, and he was expecting something more special. Another guy behind him started swearing that he knew everything and didn't warn him. Lin Xiao replied that if the guy couldn't adapt to the changing environment, why was he calling himself a martial arts master, thus dishonoring his city and himself? The guy got terribly angry at Lin Xiao and began to insult him for saying such words to him. The girl began to say that in order to get inside the camp, they all had to act in unison, because the main thing for them now was to pass this test. Lin agreed with her, adding that they shouldn't lose anyone from their city because the most famous talent camp. He gestured at Lu Xun next and clarified that not everyone was from the same city because there was a stranger among them, and suggested that he go first to check the path for them. Someone laughed and thought it was the right thing to do, but the girl defended Lu, saying that it was unfair. Lu Xun himself only smirked contentedly at all of this and walked forward. The guy asked Lin Xiao to give way to him since he wasn't going to go there, to which he laughed and sarcastically told him to be careful. Lu Xun turned around and replied that he didn't need his support because the tiger always hunts alone. He also added that only sheep walk in flocks, which caught Lin Xiao off guard. For a while longer, Lin stood silently looking at Lu, calling out what he had said. He shouted at the departing guy to answer for his words about the herd, because he wouldn't tolerate being treated like that. But Lu didn't even listen to him and walked on, stepping on one of the tiles that activated the beginning of the ordeal. At that moment, a bunch of flying balls descended on them from all sides. All of these balls landed, and Lu noticed that they weren't just some harmless things, but something else entirely. The balloons hissed and turned into huge mechanical puppets. Lin knew that even the weakest puppets were not inferior in strength to a rank 1 master, so he decided that they were just here to take them all down. These puppets had certain programs embedded in them that allowed them to use strong martial arts techniques and the most powerful attacks of rank 4 warriors. This was the first time Lu had seen such structures, and thought that it was much more expensive to make one than to train a warrior to the 4th rank. Lin didn't understand why Lu didn't retreat, because the puppets would instantly activate and attack as soon as a person approached them. Everyone knew that these puppets were freakishly powerful, and even laughed at the fact that a guy who didn't even look like a rank 1 was trying to attack first. The mechanical puppet smelled the approach of a living creature and immediately began to attack. Lu Shen didn't even take a step back and remained standing in his place. There was something like an explosion, and the whole area was engulfed in thick smoke. The guys covered their hands from the flow of energy coming from the impact and tried to see something. When the smoke slowly cleared, everyone saw how easily Lu Shen held the mechanical puppet with one hand. The guys were greatly surprised that this unknown guy had stopped it so easily. Lu Shen, on the other hand, remained completely calm as usual and asked if there would be anything else. The mechanical doll hovered in the air and couldn't seem to move. It was as if it was paralyzed by the guy's power and began to collapse at the point of his grasp. Something like a strong magnetic field formed around him and the doll. The girl and the others wondered who this guy, who was clearly not a weakling as they thought, was. Lin laughed loudly. I said that I had misunderstood everything, and these puppets were actually just ordinary wood with no strength or power. To prove his words, he asked the guys that if that wasn't the case, how would this simpleton hold them back so easily? The guys still doubted his words because the puppets looked real, and Lin asked them to knock it off because they, dumbheads, wouldn't understand it. He decided to prove it himself and went up to one of the dolls, asking everyone to watch how he was going to easily destroy these empty dolls. On the count of 3, he swung his foot and hit one of the doll's mechanisms. The boys breathed a sigh of relief, deciding that he was right, and it was just a piece of wood. The top small mechanism fell off the puppet, and Lin put his foot on it victoriously and shouted to everyone that he was right. He went on to say that it was just a bunch of garbage to intimidate them. But Lin didn't know yet that when he turned around, a powerful blow to the head from that puppet was waiting for him. The guy was sealed into the wall in the same second, leaving a deep impact mark there. At that moment, he realized that it wasn't even a rank 1, but just a killing machine. The guys ran over to Lin Xiao and tried to quickly bring him to his senses. The girl at this time thought that if these were rank 2 puppets, what kind of strength does Lu have? Lu Shen knew that every puppet had a weak point that could be easily defeated by hitting it, but there were too many puppets. Because of this, he didn't bother and decided to immediately sneak to the exit. With one powerful blow, he attacked all the puppets that were scattered around. The duty officer behind the wall did not understand why all the mechanical puppets were out of order at once. After all, they had just been put into use. While he was trying to figure out how this bunch of teenagers were able to break a bunch of rank 2 machines, Lu had already appeared before him. Lu Shen said that he wasn't sure until the end that it was rank 2, but after hearing what he said, he was convinced. He stood as if on fire and said that he wanted to fulfill the expectations of this camp. The guy gathered Pest, all his strength, and with the help of star power prepared to attack. The duty officer stopped understanding what was going on here at all. Meanwhile, somewhere in the main control center, someone was checking the new recruits. A uniformed girl was taking turns observing the participants and disqualifying those who failed. She was the lieutenant colonel of this training camp and was typing something quickly. Major Qin leisurely entered the center with a mug of hot drink, thanking this day for a good start. He said hello to the lieutenant colonel, calling her Qingzhou, knowing in advance that she didn't like it. The girl immediately reacted sternly, asking him not to call her that. She asked him to come over and help her look at the materials if he was so free. He inquired about the fighters, but Lieutenant Column Dan was frustrated as there were 8 or 9 people out of everyone, but even those were new recruits. Major Cheng took a closer look at each of them and said that there were even average ones among them. The recruits' talents were mainly strength, speed, and defense. Looking at the screen, he saw a girl with a spiritual type of ability, which pleased him. The lieutenant colonel began to tell him that this girl was by far the strongest and had unlocked her talent in 2 years, approaching the 2nd rank. The major said, with a smile, that she was as talented and beautiful as the lieutenant colonel once was. The girl asked him not to joke, as she identified her as the main find of their camp. The major decided to look at a few more fighters and said there were still some good options. He was calm and peaceful exactly until he saw something quite interesting on the screen. From surprise, he spilled his drink and started yelling that he couldn't believe his eyes. Lieutenant Column Dan couldn't stand it and brought everything up on the big screen to see exactly what had shocked the major. In one of the rooms, there was a battle between a mechanical doll and a participant. The huge doll attacked with a laser gaze, but was defeated by its opponent. A girl named Charlene, who the lieutenant colonel and major thought was the most capable, finished off the last puppet. She didn't understand why she still felt threatened if she had passed everything, but no one had yet come to check the test results. Suddenly, the doors at the end of the corridor in front of her opened, and she saw a strange sight. The men on duty in the control bay were tensely preparing for a counterattack with someone. The girl was curious as to why so many soldiers had arrived in one area and who they were expecting here. She heard the sound of battle and was even more interested, for there were few armed duty personnel worried about it. Through the wall, through her spiritual power, she was able to recognize two humans fighting each other, which left her puzzled, for they should only be fighting robots here. Even through the thick walls, Charlene was able to feel the strong energy from Lu Shen. For a moment, she could clearly see his face and cold gaze. What she saw scared the girl so much that she could barely stay on her feet. Everyone present in that compartment suddenly felt an energy field. The doors behind them squeaked unlocked, and everyone waited to see who would enter. Charlene was just out of her mind as she sensed something scary and powerful. The lieutenant colonel and the major entered the bay and began to question what was going on in there, but there was no information as all the cameras outside the perimeter had been destroyed and communication with the duty officer had broken down. The major ordered that he be given all copies of the surveillance tapes before they were disabled. Lieutenant Column Dan said there was no point in doing that anymore because there was a crack in the wall. Everyone froze with lingering anticipation and fear. After making a hole in the wall, Lu Shen came out of the testing room to them. One of the soldiers on duty laughed nervously, saying that it was just an ordinary schoolboy. After just a second, the laughter stopped as Lu Shen's heavy aura hung over everyone. The guy was dragging the test taker on duty in his hand towards everyone. The lieutenant colonel immediately realized that he wasn't from Chin City, where most of the guys came from. She didn't know what he was, and asked him about it when he let the duty officer go. The guy proudly introduced himself as Lu Shen from Baihe City, looking down on everyone. The major laughed and praised the guy for destroying a bunch of expensive puppets and giving the instructor a hard time as well. The guy began to explain that it was an accident because he thought it was also part of the test. He also clarified that the instructor was quite strong, so he wasn't hurt too badly. At that moment, it was as if sparks and lightning flew from Lieutenant Column Dan towards the guy. But he was not frightened and remained calmly standing in his place without flinching. After a few seconds, she walked over to him and congratulated him on successfully passing the test, offering to pass to rest. She could see that this guy was just insane since he had dispensed with their mechanical puppets so easily. The major said he looked at his results, which they were shocked by, and Dan tried to test him with spiritual power, but felt nothing. He asked the lieutenant colonel what she would do with him, to which Dan replied that she would put him on the top list and watch. They both already knew ahead of time that this time the selection would be quite exciting. Lu Shen felt that the lieutenant colonel was testing his abilities, and although her spiritual strength surpassed his by at least 5 times, it wasn't like she had learned anything. The duty officer escorting the guy to his room informed him that they had a canteen on the way, and the first place to go was there. Lu Shen asked if there was a lot of food there, to which the duty officer led him to a huge table of food and told him he could eat whatever he wanted. Just a few minutes later, the shocked duty officer watched as the guy ordered more refills after a ton of food. While he was shoveling, a girl came over to his table and asked for permission to sit down. She introduced herself as Yang Yuan from Baihe and reminded him that they had already met at the test last time. The guy offered to go get her some food, which was plentiful, but the girl didn't care about that at all. He started talking about how the president of the Martial Arts Association told him that he was the only one from their city who had come here. Yan replied that he was wrong, because there were quite a few guys coming from the city, but in recent years, almost no one had passed the entrance exam. And even if they did pass onward, most of the guys left here for lack of points. Lu inquired about the points in question, and learned that it was something that could be used to utilize the camp's resources. To use the training equipment, contact the designers, purchase medicine, and even lodging, they needed these goggles. Even what they ate in the dining hall would only be available for points in the next one, and so far, there were only 3 people in the camp who had earned them. Lu wondered how to earn them, and the girl replied that you had to take an entrance exam first. She began to tell him that the first was a talented second-ranked fighter, Cao Yun, who possessed steel muscles. The second was Meng Jin, who was a second-rank fighter from Donggang City with incredible speed. The third and last was a girl whose talent had only recently manifested, but was not inferior to the previous ones in the slightest. She was currently the strongest in the training camp, and her name was Charlene, a master of spiritual power. Charlene was just passing by with a tray of food and heard something about herself. She turned around and saw at a neighboring table the very guy who gave her the creeps. The girl was simply horrified and rushed towards the exit as fast as she could. Lu Shen noticed her and realized that it was Charlene, but somehow she was not as bold as she was described. Yang noticed the girl's ambivalent reaction and asked if they knew each other. The boy asked if there was anyone else, and the girl remembered the fourth one, but she didn't give it much thought because she thought it was a story, because they told terrible stories about him. It was said that he had single-handedly handled a bunch of mechanical dolls and had also finished off an instructor. Jan said the man was clearly a monster or insane, to which Lu laughed and choked. Jan thought this camp was totally living up to its reputation, and although this guy had made a name for himself in their town, he was getting mouthed by the more talented guys here. She handed him a napkin and asked him not to worry about anything as she believed in him. The girl cheerfully said that with his talent and strength, he would surely become like those three. The boy coughed and took her napkin as the soldiers came for him. One of them began to read out that the kid had damaged 18 mechanical dolls and caused damage to the instructor. For these reasons, they had to have a certain conversation with him. The soldiers asked to follow them, and Lu Shen obediently stood up. He replied that he understood everything, while everyone in the canteen was shocked by what was happening. The guy asked the soldiers with childish naivety if he could wrap up what he hadn't finished with him. The soldiers were a bit surprised and confused by such a request, but they allowed it. Lu Shen lastly apologized to Yang for disappearing so abruptly. The guys in the canteen began to talk about how the monster story was not a story at all. At this time, Yang immediately remembered all the insulting words she had said to him and was dumbfounded. Lu Shen appeared at the training camp's command control room to see the colonel. Dan began to talk about how the guy had ruined their 6-month budget with a couple of blows. The cost of each of the dolls was over 10 million, and now none of them could be recovered. Despite all this, the management concluded that he had done what he was supposed to on the entrance exam. At the same time, the others, led by the major, entered the command center. He began to say that finally, all those who had distinguished themselves in the entrance exam were finally gathered together. Lu Shen furtively turned around to look at those who were among the top 3. The guys also looked at Lu, having already heard amazing stories about him. The lieutenant colonel began to congratulate everyone on passing the entrance exam. She began to say that in their training camp, strength determines the amount of resources available, and they would receive their first points as a reward for passing the test the best. The points would be stored on a special card that she handed out to everyone. One of the guys remembered that it was the same golden card with 100 points that his teacher had told him about. The other guy was also happy to see that he had already made it to the top of the leaderboard. Charlene also knew that the card had a whole 100 points on it, and decided that should be enough to get private lessons from the strongest master of telepathy. When they finally finished admiring their cards, they noticed that Lu Shen's card was white in color. Lu Shen began to look at the card that he hadn't heard of before, and even thought that there was nothing on it at all. On the back of the card were written the rules for using the glasses. He couldn't understand what all those numbers meant, and decided that he wouldn't even have enough for dinner. The major laughed at him and explained that this card had 1,000 points on it thanks to the lieutenant colonel. The other guys were shocked to hear about Lu Shen's point count. Cao Yun, with steely muscles, grinned disgruntledly and started to say how wrong he was. He thought that this training camp was all about strength and connections didn't matter. The guy went on to say that he was a little saddened that he was so badly mistaken. Meng Jin said that he too was amazed by such connections, and Charlene shouted to everyone that they just didn't see what this guy had done. Chow didn't share the girl's enthusiasm and said that he was sure the guy had bribed the instructors and students. However, he still thought about what kind of strength this guy might have if he had just dealt with the mechanical puppets and the instructor so easily. He remembered again that in the training camp, resources were obtained by force. What that meant to him was that he had to show everyone how strong he was now. The major noticed the tension between the boys and wanted to intervene. Lieutenant Colonel Dan prevented him from doing so by gesturing to stop him. Lu Shen just calmly asked if the guy was sure of his assumptions. Cao menacingly told the guy to stop talking and promised to show him what true talent was today. He had already used his ability and reincarnated into a man of steel, shouting that one strike would be enough for him. Lu Shen had already known exactly how he would fight back all this time and summoned the power of the stars. After receiving one light slap on his opponent's forehead, Cao flew back into the wall, in which he made a huge hole. Lu could already hear the outrage around him and wondered if he would be forced to make amends. From the deep hole in the wall, only Cao's legs could be seen, which had reincarnated into his former appearance. Meng and Charlene were horrified at this guy's strength, realizing that everything they had said about him was pure truth. Major Qin was as delighted as the guys, and the lieutenant colonel looked at Lu enigmatically. Lu Shen stood in complete silence for a while longer, and then asked if he could be free to go rest. He was about to leave when he was suddenly stopped by the lieutenant colonel. She asked the guy to make a training plan, and with so many points, she offered to help him as a mentor. Lu Shen politely thanked the lieutenant colonel and replied that he had to refuse, as there were more important things waiting for him. The major was surprised by this answer, because what could be more important than training under the mentorship of a lieutenant colonel? The guys were in agreement with the major's opinion, and no one still did not understand the reason for his refusal. Lu Shen realized what they all might think of him, but he couldn't reveal the truth. He only replied to everyone that he should go to bed sooner, as he was very tired. The guys were shocked even more, so it was completely stupid and illogical. The major laughed out loud, finding the guy very funny, and the lieutenant colonel was just at a loss. As soon as the guy left the command control center, she immediately rushed to the cameras to see where he was actually going. Both the major and the lieutenant colonel were confused, as the guy had actually gone to sleep, and Qin found him to be quite peculiar and not as simple as he might seem. The major actually thought that this guy would be able to motivate others to grow. But Lieutenant Column Dan was in disagreement with him, remembering the case of a fellow named Xiang Peng. Qin couldn't help but remember this incident as well, as just remembering it made him feel sick. Xiang Peng in the first set of training camp was simply a king, outshining everyone else. Dan knew that it was the power-type talents that had a great advantage in the early stages, because it was easy to fight with a huge combat power behind one's shoulders. Everything really mattered: skills, speed, observation, logic, experience, technique, and tactics, as well as strength, and not just physical strength. Also important was all-round development while growing up, and the strength type would fade over time. It was for this reason that she was worried about Lu Shen's such tremendous strength. Lu Shen had already reached his room and immediately went to bed to defeat a couple more zombies. He fought one giant, defending himself from its powerful attacks with an energy field. The zombie flew around the guy from the other side and was about to deliver a powerful blow. Lu Shen, as always, managed to block the attack by deftly grabbing the monster's arm. The guy found a spear nearby and grabbed it, deciding to try to fight with it. He quickly jumped to the zombie and stuck the spear into the opponent's leg, winning a few seconds. At this moment, Lu Shen used a combination of his powers. Star power flew into the zombie at an unexpected moment and crushed it. After destroying it, Lu thought that when he was alive, this zombie was probably a rank 6 master and was equal to the president of the Martial Arts Association, Xiao Yuehei, in terms of strength. He also knew that if he didn't block the attack by using all his strength, it wouldn't work. But for him, the priority right now was to increase his skill and combat experience. He was sure that this required not only strength, but also all-round development, as Lieutenant Column Dan had said earlier. That was why he tried to learn as much experience from the future as possible. Limitless strength and flawlessness was his path in martial arts to the rank of a perfect master. Spiritual ability also played an important role, which unfortunately was still underdeveloped and only worked against zombies, so he wanted to improve it as soon as possible. Lu Shen clearly realized that in a fight with a real master, he would not succeed. The guy delved into his inner world again and tried to concentrate. He wanted to learn how to analyze spiritual powers and concentrate his spirit. Gathering his thoughts, he tried to get inside his mind again. The boy slowly reached deep into his inner energy, hoping to succeed. Lu did his best to do so, and he could be pushed back like he was struck by lightning. The guy himself, even in his sleep, experienced the strongest energy discharge from the spiritual force. His consciousness inside seemed to shatter into small shards like glass. After a couple of seconds, he came to his senses again and realized that he had finally succeeded. Lu summoned Ellie again and decided that he hadn't looked into his future in a long time. He wanted so badly to see if anything had changed there. He asked Ellie to open his bio for him, and his file appeared on the screen, changed by an order of magnitude. Lu Shen was very happy when he saw that he could still reach the 7th rank and many other things. He next asked Ellie to enter crystal vision, star tempering, and natural breath techniques into the search engine. The holographic screen immediately displayed detailed information about each of the techniques. He also realized that although he was limited to the 3rd rank, he could use other more advanced techniques. At that moment, the guy noticed some sort of scroll labeled Crystal Vision. Inside was an entire technique written entirely by a rank 11 master included in Project Beam. This description was called Spiritual Vision Statements and was simply a priceless treasure in the world of martial arts. He could not imagine such a thing, because there was a reason why none of the martial artists knew about this skill, because it was designed specifically for spiritual masters. Speaking out contained more than just the skills of utilizing spiritual power and tactics. The main thing was that this practice was radically different from other spiritual sayings and scrolls. The essence of this utterance was using spiritual power to create a spiritual warrior body. One could recreate muscle fibers at the cellular and even genetic level for the sake of all-round development. The first step was in using spiritual power to strengthen the organs of the body, which allowed one to accelerate the power of skills in the body. He was able to increase his combat power, but here was the skill power was standing still, and so this was more timely than ever. Lu Shen realized that if he could deal with this, he would completely strengthen his body. Until today, the guy had underestimated martial arts that contained the wisdom of thousands of years, but today, he had memorized the name of the great master who had created this scroll. He was well aware that such talents were born once every millennium. Still, there was one thing that depressed him, despite all his successes: the irreversible collapse of civilization. The guy clearly realized that he would have to do a lot, and he had a long way to go. Every minute and second, or rather all of his time, he must spend on becoming stronger. Charlene was in the training room and was trying to increase her spiritual power. She was doing quite well, considering the points she had gotten and the opportunities she had opened up. The girl was learning quite quickly and getting what she wanted. Her spiritual power grew with each meditation, and Charlene could feel it. The girl knew she shouldn't rely on luck alone, so she worked hard and persistently. During her training, someone entered the room and praised her for being a fast learner. It was Lieutenant Column Dan, praising the girl for being able to handle 3 star cones without interference, and she would soon learn to handle 6. 6 cones gave one the opportunity to reach the first step of spiritual master. Charlene bowed politely to the lieutenant colonel and thanked her for everything, to which Dan replied that it was all about her talent and diligence. Dan also clarified that despite all her success, there was a huge hole in the girl's spiritual will. She asked Charlene if anyone had left a spiritual mark on her. The girl was horrified at these words and nodded silently, remembering Lu Shen's gaze, and asked if there was any way to get rid of this problem. The lieutenant colonel didn't see it as a big problem and easily gave Charlene some advice. She said it was very simple, and all she had to do was to find the person who had put fear in her soul and deal with him, or better yet, destroy him. Only in this way could the trace of the influence be gone forever from the girl's spiritual power. Charlene did not specify who had done this to her and was horrified by such words because she could not even imagine such a thing. The lieutenant colonel did not understand why the girl was so frightened, for her powers were rapidly increasing and she saw no problem in accomplishing this. Charlene immediately remembered the recent rumors that said that the guy had recently had a crisis and perhaps his strength hadn't increased. She pulled herself together at the same moment and thought that she might actually try to do it. On the way out of the training room, the lieutenant colonel had a major waiting for her, asking if everything had gone smoothly. Dan replied that it had gone well, but that the girl was too soft-hearted, to which the major cheerfully replied that not everyone was like her, and her character was not so bad compared to his charges. The lieutenant colonel also brought up the guy in the top 3 and said that she was able to teach him everything in 2 months. The major reported about Lu Sheng, who only slept for days, and the guards reported it after bringing him food, so he was hopeless. He reminded the lieutenant colonel of her saying that the guy could do whatever he wanted as long as he wasn't hurting any of them, and Dan decided that was a mistake. The major wondered if Lu Shen could still be the man to lead the others, and Dan realized she had to be careful with him. The lieutenant colonel shouted sternly for this guy to do whatever he wanted, while the major had to train Meng to make sure Charlene didn't beat him to a pulp during training. Meanwhile, Yun, who was working in one of the camp's cafeterias, stopped for a little break. Another girl was carrying dishes past her and offered to help since she had been so helpful last time. The girls were envious of those who had already gotten 100 points on their cards this month because they didn't have to count every penny because they only had enough points for 2 days' food. Just in time, the girl asked Yang Yuan what Lu Shen from her city was doing because they were rumored to be on good terms. Yang Yuan thought about it for a moment and sighed sadly, saying that she didn't know what he was doing now. She replied cheerfully, as she had heard that the boy had gone into a frenzy after arriving at the camp, and after that, she had not heard a word from him. She had also heard that the guy was lying on the bed in his room all day long, and many people had already surpassed him in strength, which probably spoke of how the guy was very scared, because if he had known earlier that strength-type talents were fading so quickly, he wouldn't have flashed the light so as not to be embarrassed. Yang Yuan refused to believe this kind of rumor because she felt that Lu Shen was not like this at all. She didn't want to hear any more of this nonsense and told the girl that she still had a lot of work to do, but she would finish it all by herself so she could go. Suddenly, someone shouted loudly and called everyone to the training room where Cao Yun was currently testing the quadruple gravity. The girl was excited to hear this, because the power quadrupled was simply incredible in terms of amplification speed, and remembered the last time she entered the room with twice the gravity and couldn't last more than 20 minutes there. She immediately grabbed Yang Yuan's hand and led her to rather look at such a breathtaking sight. Yang Yuan was only interested in what Lu Shen was actually doing right now. Lu Shen all this time was not just lying on the bed and resting, but gaining experience and powerful forces. Cao Yun, meanwhile, was in the gravity room and was struggling to stay on his feet. The instructor at the glass reported that the guy had already been there for 4 minutes, which was half a minute longer than last time. Cao Yun stood there for a bit longer and pressed the button to stop the training since he couldn't resist anymore. When he walked out, he was greeted by the rapturous looks of the other guys who were talking about how they couldn't even last 10 minutes in an ordinary gravity room. Cao Yun took the towel and felt like a true master at this moment, able to almost take over the entire world. He arrogantly thought about how he was now respected and feared by everyone, and was already thinking about what would happen when he completely overpowered the room with 4 times gravity. One of the guys ran up to Cao and started saying that he was about to overcome the 4-fold gravity and had already obtained the 3rd rank, so he didn't even know who could match him in the upcoming competition. Cao Yun had a severe aching headache after training, but he still inquired as to what state he was in right now. The boy quickly realized that he was talking about Lu Sheng and told the same thing that everyone knew. When they brought him food, the boy was always snoozing. They pictured him sweetly sleeping in a warm bed next to a mountain of dishes after eating the food and began to resent him for how much longer they could behave like this. Cao Yun thought he was an insolent brat, and although he had been inferior to him in the beginning, the advantage was clearly on his side now, so there was no need to worry anymore. He was sure that Lu Shen had wasted a whole month and his points, so he would be kicked out before the test. The guy even compared himself to the sly turtle that had skillfully overtaken the sleeping rabbit, saying that now he would show him his true strength. While he was indulging in his reverie, he didn't notice how Lu Shen himself walked past him lightning fast forward to the gravity room. Lu Shen was already looking at the gravity resistance training room, which he thought looked pretty good. Cao Yun snidely laughed at the guy, saying that after a month of rest, he finally deigned to show up and train, but it was too late. Lu Shen quickly checked his card account and was surprised that he had spent so many points on food, so he decided to set the time to stay in the room to 3 hours to begin with. The guy opted for 3 hours with twice the gravity, after which he had his points deducted from his card. He turned around and said that it had been a whole month and it was time to check his strength gains, to which Cao indignantly replied that he had spent the whole month in the dorm and there could be no gains. The system had already started the countdown to the start of the training, and Cao began to shout that you cannot just walk into the gravity room without even warming up. The guy ignored him and went inside, and the system recommended that the warrior use physical strength to deal with gravity. Cao caustically began to say that the gravity resistance room was no joke, and if he didn't do a proper warm-up to warm up his muscles, the external pressure could easily cause his internal organs to rupture and bleed, after which he would be immobilized. He had already hoped that Lu wouldn't be able to start the test properly, so his song was over. Everyone present quickly walked to the window of the room and stared at Lu Shen, for a moment deciding that the gravity system was malfunctioning. This was because the gravity had already started, and the guy remained standing still, thus showing no reaction. At some point, Lu Shen clenched his hands into fists, and everything around him shook violently. The guys behind the glass thought that an earthquake had started, Such was the strong recoil from the gravitational field. Chao Yun couldn't believe what he was seeing. After all, the guy hadn't gone out for a single training session in a month, and he was doing so well there. The other guys also ran over to look at that most famous Lu Sheng. They watched with admiration and delight as the guy not only managed to stay on his feet, but also did various techniques. The guys didn't understand how he could perform dissecting blows in high gravity, while some couldn't just stand there quietly. Lu Shen himself felt a very unusual sensation in his entire body from the gravity field. He realized that he was doing quite well and quickly walked over to the system to select a new mode. Chao Yun really hoped that the guy couldn't take it after all and decided to stop the test. Suddenly, everyone felt some strange feeling of attraction and erosia in their entire body and began to cry out in fright about what was going on here. Even Chao Yun realized that this was something very strong and serious, and they could barely hold on, even though they were far behind the glass. Someone dared to come closer and noticed on the screen that the guy had launched quadruple gravity. Lu Shen was doing quite well and finally felt what it felt like to increase gravity, deciding not to stop there. He leisurely lowered himself to one knee and placed his hand on the floor, thinking of something quite interesting. The guys were just watching the guy's ordeal carefully, trying to catch the essence of his actions. Looking at all this, they somehow decided that Lu Shen couldn't take it anymore and decided to give up. At this time, Charlene was walking down the hallway from her training, thinking about how much she had washed herself in the last few classes. Suddenly, she noticed a bunch of people crowded around one of the windows of the training room and decided to go see what was going on too. As she got closer, she saw the astonished faces of the guys and was even more surprised, finally confused. She went over to one of the guys and whispered to ask what they were all staring at, but she didn't hear anything clear. Charlene squeezed between the guys in the center and was shocked at what she saw in the gravity room. Lu Shen was standing upside down on 2 toes on quadruple gravity without a single extra movement. Charlene was again puzzled that it was Lu Shen, for everyone knew what he had been doing all these days. Chao Yun was of course the most displeased. Not only could he not realize the guy's strength, but he also couldn't understand how he had increased it so quickly. There was no way he could rest at all on the thought that Lu Shen had slept in plates of food for a whole month, and now he had just destroyed it in an obvious way. In his mind, he was once again a turtle, only flying straight into the abyss, never catching up to the fast rabbit. Lu Shen, while he was upside down, felt that the fourfold gravity was quite all right, and even reminded him of something. In an instant, he jumped to the control buttons and began to change something in the current mode. The guys were already hysterical that the guy had decided to choose 5-fold gravity and said to call someone from the management. Lu Shen had everything under control, and right now his natural breathing technique was changing into earth breathing, which literally made the walls shake. One of the guys who had been watching all this ran out to the others and called out for everyone to run to the gravity resistance room urgently because the same guy had returned. All of them, horrified and indignant, quickly ran forward, not believing what they were being told. None of them could in any way realize the truth of what was happening and accept what they were seeing. A whole crowd gathered around the glass of the gravity room, watching Lu Sheng's every move with interest, for no one knew what to expect from him. At one point, Chao Yun jumped up and ran towards the glass, as he was simply shocked. Lu Shen had chosen the 5 times gravity mode and was successfully handling it as if it was nothing difficult. Increasing the gravitational pressure by 5 times was almost suitable for his training in his current state, and with this pressure, he should barely be able to manage the movements of the star power technique, so he decided to increase the gravity even more until it was completely impossible. He could still feel the force in his body and decided that it was in no way enough and too little. The guy wanted even more pressure to get him to the limit of his capabilities. The guys were amazed at Lu Shen's abilities and discussed amongst themselves that perhaps he would stop here and end it all, but they didn't seem to believe their own words. It was a wonder to them how he was even able to stand there, since they wouldn't even have entered that room. While they thought he might finally stop, they saw the guy hit the continue button and were shocked even more. Lieutenant Colonel Dan was in the command control center with the major going over the latest fighter data for the reporting period. She was upset that in just a couple days, a few more guys had flown out, and in total, too many people had left their camp. Major Chin only said to this that they were all unnecessary sissies, and to become stronger, one had to go through a series of certain trials, so it was no wonder that not everyone could withstand it. Dan was surprised that the guys can't handle a little pressure and hardship. After all, if they find themselves on the battlefield and have to fight monsters of incredible strength, it's not a fact that they can handle it, to which Chin replied that the girl was taking it too seriously, and there are actually a lot of good candidates this year. He predicted that about 80% would make it to the end, but in the meantime, he decided to look at the gravity training chamber where someone had already managed to break the record. The Major looked alarmed for a moment because someone had set a new record in the gravity resistance training room. Dan was sure it was Chow Yun after all. He had just recently passed the quadruple pressure, but it was the person they least expected it from. Lu Shen appeared on the screen and experienced gravity at 8 times resistance. From what she saw, the glass with the sweet drink in the lieutenant colonel's hand clenched with such force that it burst apart. She jumped up and couldn't realize that she was seeing on the screen the very guy who had left all their hopes in his room while everyone was hard at work. The Major wondered what rank the guy was now, but Lieutenant Colonel Dan didn't seem to care much about that anymore. She scrutinized the screen and reported that this was exactly the guy they needed. Lu Shen in the gravity room was coping with their last strength and didn't even know how much longer he could last. He realized that with his current strength, it was still too hard to cope with 8 times the pressure of gravity, and he felt that he was already at his limit. Despite the hardships, the guy wasn't going to give up and decided to try a new technique to try and endure some more. He felt as if his heart had split into separate cells for a moment. Each of these cells filled him with energy and strength, and something like electric lightning discharged throughout his body. Lu Shen felt his whole body filled with a new flow of energy and strength, and was ready to withstand the resistance for a little longer. The energy only went through his heart, and he was able to increase his strength by as much as 10%, and realized what a vision of spiritual insight was. Gathering for the next test, Lu Shen decided to test what his limit really was. The guys behind the glass didn't know what else to expect from the guy anymore, but they saw him move towards the mode system and even tensed up a bit because it was already 8 times resistance. Chow Yun threw himself on the floor and practically sobbed at what this guy was doing in the room, and even with such a strong gravity. He didn't want to believe that Lu Shen could actually be that strong, and even thought that he was up to something. Everyone saw the gravity in the training room change, from 8 times to 9 times. Lu Shen fell to the floor from the pressure of gravity and struggled to maintain his strength. From such pressure, even the room was already barely standing, and a small dip had formed where the guy was lying. He could feel his bones literally cracking at the seams, and his blood seemed to be boiling throughout his body. He couldn't move even a millimeter, and all he could do was stay conscious. So when he felt the force of the 9-fold pressure, he realized that he couldn't handle something like this yet. At this point, Lu thought about who could change the future and prevent a tragic ending, thinking of several options such as someone practicing complex techniques, or someone incredibly talented, or maybe no one with unlimited resources. While everyone behind the glass was holding on with their last strength and lying on the floor, the guy was still able to get to his feet after his thoughts. Charlene was one of the few who noticed this, and no longer knew what this person could be capable of. Lu Shen was able to fully stand up and fight back the pressure of 9 times gravity. He was finishing the test and thought that his true strength had finally returned with him. After finishing the training, the guy headed towards the exit of the room, where a crowd of guys were already waiting for him. Lu Shen looked a little exhausted, but overall felt pretty good. At that moment, someone called his name, and the guy turned around at the call. A girl was standing in front of him, holding some towels, who said they were for him. The guy was confused for a moment and awkwardly took it, thanking the girl for her help. He took his tablet to check the data because he had no idea he would spend so much time in the room and have his glasses taken off for the entire 3 hours. The guy was sure he had spent a fortune on this, but suddenly he saw a reward on the screen in the form of points for setting a record. He opened up the gravity room score sheet and was notified that he had been awarded a record number of points that totaled about 4,500. The guys standing nearby didn't see the exact number, but knew it was a 4-digit number, coming to shock at such a thing because they themselves had a few units in their score, and even if you added all their points together, you wouldn't get even half of his total. Strangely enough, the only thing Lu Shen himself thought about was that these points should have been enough for him to eat. The guy didn't see the point of lingering here any longer and headed forward. Everyone looked at him as if he was an idol and decided that they should definitely follow him. Among everyone here was Yang, who could clearly feel the powerful aura emanating from the guy, although it was not surprising since he was able to reach 10 times gravity. It even seemed to her as if he was walking on his head and everything around him was losing its meaning. The guy really was like a tiger sneaking forward, leaving everyone behind. Yang's friend began to say that this guy was really a talent, as he was able to break Xiao Yun's record and might have already reached the 4th rank. Yan didn't even realize how great this person's strength was, because instead of resting, he went to the movement practice room. At this time, one of the guys was just undergoing movement practice in a special room equipped with laser beams. He had increased his agility level and had almost completely passed the 2nd stage. The guy cheerfully thought about being cooler than a whole half of the warriors of the world. No doubt the difference between people was normal, but now there was a whole gulf between them and the rest. He was sure that everyone else looking at him was just dreaming. While he was mentally praising himself, he didn't notice that there wasn't a soul left behind the glass of the room. The guy wondered where everyone had disappeared from his view so suddenly and noticed a crowd nearby. He also noticed that the lieutenant colonel and major were also there with the others. The guy immediately ran up to the others and started asking what they were staring at. The guys replied who they were looking at, and the guy laughed, calling Lu Shen a soft pillow bum. Someone who was there with a disgruntled face wondered who he even was. At this moment, something incredible happened, and everyone marveled loudly. All the cannons in the training room were activated at full power. This meant that the number of laser beams would be unlimited. Lu Shenya had already guessed that it would just be necessary to dodge all the beams. The difficulty was that it was impossible to predict the trajectory of all the cannons' shots. For someone it might have been a problem, but not for him. The cannons activated, and the guy with the speed of light deftly hid from all the beams. The guys behind the glass also knew about the unpredictability of the shots and were amazed at the sight. They weren't even sure if this was the first time Lu Shen had entered this room. The guy also learned that Lu Shen had broken the record in the gravity resistance room before. He fell to his knees and couldn't understand how he managed to be so strong. What had happened that the difference between them in a second was simply unbelievable. Meanwhile, the lieutenant colonel also wondered if this was the guy's first time here. It was because his movements looked like he had been here before. It even seemed to the lieutenant colonel that the guy could anticipate gunshots. She carefully watched his every move as much as possible. At one point, she noticed a beam flying straight at him with no way to dodge. Dan was already sure that this was the end of it, but she was wrong again. Lu Shen was like an incredible warrior who could handle all challenges. He passed each shot of the laser cannon one after another without much difficulty. Lieutenant Column Dan decided to test something else by using her strength. The major noticed this and asked what she was going to do. The girl stopped and for some reason changed her mind to carry out what she had planned. Lu Shen, on the other hand, thought about how he felt his movements becoming more maneuverable. The system announced that the guy had passed the 2nd level, and that was in just a couple minutes. The major remarked that the guy was completely relaxed, and his agility was close to flawless. The lieutenant colonel replied that she would see what he did next, and the major agreed with her. The system announced that the 3rd level of dexterity and movement speed training was beginning. On the 3rd level, in addition to laser beams, a bunch of solar balls flew at the guy. The guys were surprised at the difficulty of this level, as they had never seen it before. Lu Shen himself didn't seem to be ready for it, and even stumbled a bit. Despite this, he quickly pulled himself together and was already ready to pass. He could feel how hard it was already from the start, and the way to retreat was blocked, so he needed to add strength. In the very center of the room, the swords exploded upon contact with the laser beams. Lu Shen immediately moved forward towards the epicenter of events at a breakneck pace, intent on something. The major was amazed, as not all 4th and 5th ranked veterans were capable of such a thing, and he was only able to do such a thing by the age of 22. The lieutenant colonel sadly said that she got it out at 25, and she had a talent for speed from birth. Therefore, it was hard to believe that some 18-year-old brat could pull this off. Lu Shen could sense the increasing difficulty and spiritual ability alone was not enough. The major also noted that this guy was not as simple as he looked at first glance. Lu Shen was almost hit by one of the laser beams and flinched for a moment. At this moment, he decided to use a natural breathing technique, namely wind. The guys watched in amazement as the guy had already passed more than half of the 3rd level. In just a few seconds, the level was coming to an end, and the major realized that his speed was so fast that it was hard to just keep track of him. After another moment, the system announced that the 3rd level was completely passed. The major admired the guy and said that after today's accomplishments, he definitely needed a rest. But the lieutenant colonel disagreed with him and replied that Lu Shen wanted to continue. The major was horrified by this, as he himself had just started to pass the 4th level. Dan, looking at Lu Shen, was pondering about something without changing her serious expression. Lu Shen was just finishing setting up the 4th level mode. He walked over and touched the sleeping laser explosive, which immediately activated. Along with it came the activation of the other explosives that connected with each other. Lu Shen guessed that all these devices formed something like a spiderweb together. The observers thought they were ready for anything, but were shocked again. The system announced that the guy had successfully started to pass the 4th level. Dozens or even hundreds of laser beams joined together with each other. The guy felt that his wind breath was already at its limit and something had to be done. At this moment, he switched to the star tempering technique, increasing his strength. His entire body lit up with a green glow, and energy was spreading inside. Without hesitation, he channeled all of this power into the laser web around him. He felt time dragging on forever, and he remembered that this is called time perception. It was a spiritual ability that could qualitatively change spiritual power equal to the 3rd rank. All this meant that the guy had reached it, and the lieutenant colonel seemed to have realized it. They stood and watched as the glass in the training room began to shatter with a crackle. The lieutenant colonel playfully remarked that the guy appeared to be a master of spiritual powers. At this moment, Major Chin noticed Dan activating her power and was even startled. He saw her majestic power and started shouting that she was crazy. The lieutenant colonel was confident in her decision and replied that she just wanted to test it out. She sent her spiritual power forward to attack Lu Shen to test her theory. Lu Shen was already exhausted from passing the test, but everyone was able to notice the spirit flying at him. Only for a brief moment did he think about his actions, and after a second, he had no doubts about them. He responded with his spiritual power in response to the lieutenant colonel's spirit attack. The spirit whirled into a spiral and began to squeeze with incredible force. Lieutenant Colonel Dan felt a strong heaviness and could no longer resist. She informed everyone that Lu Shen turned out to really be a spiritual master and his strength was not inferior to hers. At this moment, the guy realized how many rays there were in this room. Because of the lieutenant colonel's long ordeal and inspection, his strength was running low. He had reached half of the 4th rank and decided to stop there. Lu Shen went to the center of the beams on his own and fell under their effects. The system showed his results and congratulated him on his high score. Everyone else was shocked by today and the seemingly ordinary student. Everyone was quietly calculating how much Lu Shen was surpassing them in strength. Lu Shen himself was thinking that there were still 3% of people who had surpassed him, and he urgently needed to become stronger. The lieutenant colonel was on her way to congratulate the successful trials. She inquired if he was headed for further training. Dan listed several options, and the guy replied that none of them suited him. He opened his tablet and looked at today's menu, adding that he was heading to the mess hall. The lieutenant colonel was discouraged, and everyone around her laughed out loud. 3 hours later, she and the major summoned him to her command control center. The major explained that he had summoned him to take a simple force assessment test. The lieutenant colonel showed some kind of syringe and asked if he had used it. Lu Shen replied that he had never managed to do it once, as the needle kept breaking. The major laughed and said that he was right about the 3rd rank and needed a syringe with a golden needle. She hesitated for a moment, but after that, she immediately reached into her jacket pocket. Dan pulled out the syringe and explained that it was used to test rank 5 warriors. The girl also added that the syringe should fit and began the test. The golden syringe drew the required amount of blood from the guy's finger in a second. Immediately, the information about his level of 26.5 units in the 3rd rank popped up. The lieutenant colonel said that she hadn't met a young warrior with such a rank in almost 10 years. The major suggested that he next test his combat power on the machine. Lu Shen happily agreed, as he wanted to see his limit himself. Before making a strike, he recalled all of his learned techniques. The first was breath and fire, and then star quenching, after which he made a strike. The evaluation machine in a moment seemed to catch fire from such combat power. The results showed his power to be nearly 300,000, and his warrior rank was 4th. The major shuddered at the fact that his combat power was not inferior to a rank 5 warrior. He cheerfully informed the guy that he had practically passed the training camp and could do whatever he wanted. The lieutenant colonel wasn't done yet and asked Lu Shen to stay for a moment. Dan showed the energy crystal, which was a very ancient and precious crystal, and said that it was testing the spiritual power. The lieutenant colonel asked the guy to touch the crystal to determine his level. For an example, she herself showed how to do it, and instantly her results appeared. The major was surprised at such readings, and the lieutenant colonel clarified that she practiced every day. Dan placed the crystal on the table, and with a look, she told Lu Shen to place her hand on it. The major was already getting sarcastic about the fact that the guy might have strength equal to her. Lu Xun at this time looked like a spiritual god, absorbing all of the crystal's energy. The lieutenant colonel knew what that could mean, but she couldn't realize it. The results showed that the guy was far superior in spiritual power to Dan. She was shocked that his spiritual power was 5 times higher than hers. The lieutenant colonel knew more than anyone how difficult it was to refine spiritual power because it was equivalent to folding a stack of towels the thickness of a single coin. Dan still couldn't believe that the boy had managed to accomplish that in his 18 years. While she was thinking of what word to use to describe him, the major chimed in that the guy was infinitely cool. For that, he was hit on the head in the same second, but he didn't realize why. The major came to his senses, and the lieutenant colonel asked if Lu Xun had a spiritual teacher. The guy replied that he did, and that he had shown him special techniques to develop spiritual power. For a moment, she even exhaled, for she couldn't believe that he had learned everything on his own. She asked how long ago he had discovered his power, to which Lu replied that it was about 3 months ago. It seemed that no one in the room had expected that answer, so it was like a thunderclap. Dan repeated his words about 3 months with some trepidation and praised him for making such progress. She clarified that even if one were to go through all the masters in the Spirit Association over a couple decades, it would be impossible to recall a single person as talented. Lu was surprised that spiritual masters also had an association that was different from the Martial Arts Association. Despite the large population of their country, the awakening of such power was only 1%. Dan noticed the boy's puzzled face and assumed that his teacher had deliberately kept this information from him so as not to interfere with the training process, because that was the reason why the purity of the spiritual power was decreasing. The lieutenant colonel suggested the guy to join this association and took out her token, thanks to which they would know what to do with him there. Lu Xun reached for the token and clarified that he had never seen his teacher, and he was becoming more mysterious with each lesson. Dan assumed that his teacher was a good person who was eager to showcase his students' talent, even though he was hiding it. She realized that this was what the best of the best would do, but even she didn't know such a thing. Lu Xun realized that it was difficult for him to explain where he got such strength from, and even decided to confess everything. Only it was difficult because the teacher was from the future and would only appear after 10,000 years, having an 11th rank, whose name was Duan Yifeng. The major decided to intervene in their conversation and apologized, saying that he had to interrupt them despite having such a nice conversation because he had something to discuss with Lu Xun. He handed the guy a card with about 5 million in his account and said that he was the clear winner, although it wasn't the end of the training camp season yet, but it would be as a bonus to him for his exceptional breakthrough. Lu Xun was shocked at the said amount, and the lieutenant colonel clarified to make him grateful, because it was their allowable limit due to the fact that most of the expenses went to the trainees' 3 meals a day. The major patted the guy on the shoulder and cheerfully informed him that he was the most voracious one here and had already eaten about 7 or 8 million, which didn't even make Lu feel uncomfortable. He had never imagined that the canteen would be so expensive, so he decided that from now on, he would cut back a little on his appetite. The lieutenant colonel went on to say that although the amount was not very large, it was enough to prove the sincerity of the Eastern military unit's intentions. Lu Xun took the map from the major's hands, and scrutinizing it carefully, he guessed that this Eastern division definitely wanted something from him. Major Chin laughed and replied that the guy was very smart because it was partly true. Dan, however, was as resolute and serious as ever, and said that from now on, the boy should realize that with such talent, he would have to fight on the battlefield no matter what. She added just as sternly that without battles and blood, one could never become a true warrior. The major told her that the country and the association gave warriors a lot of support and privileges to be enjoyed, and sooner or later he would become one anyway, and they hoped that when it came to choosing a unit, they would be prioritized. He also added with a chuckle that they have one advantage. The warrior girls of the Eastern Division are the prettiest in the whole country. The major was so enthusiastic that he began to describe in detail all the qualities of the girls. In short, he considered them a complete ideal in every sense and concept. The lieutenant colonel could not stand it any longer and threw a clipboard at the major, throwing him away, and said that by the decision of their unit, he would be the representative of their training camp of Dongning province and would participate in the review of Qiming generals of all eastern provinces. Lu Xun had in no way expected such an honor and was even too surprised at the generous offer. Dan explained that each eastern province held annual talent training camps to select the best who could become generals. The lieutenant colonel clarified if the guy even understood what the matter was about now. Lu Shen knew better than anyone what the conversation was about and replied that they were competing for the GURU position. The major said that General Qiming was the elite of the future and a great talent, and that only one person was chosen every year from all the eastern provinces. He also added that being that chosen one was a very honorable title, and it was up to him whether to accept or not, to which the guy immediately replied in agreement. Lu Shen realized that it was in his hands to attempt to change the fate of all mankind, so it was necessary to change the game. The major and lieutenant colonel were confident in his abilities, and if he suddenly failed, no one else would be capable of doing it. He also added that there would be great rewards there that wouldn't even compare to their training camp. Dan reminded him that selection was still a couple months away and would begin at the end of the camp shift, so she would let him know when the university entrance exams started. The major, on the other hand, was sure he didn't need the entrance exams and could do whatever he wanted right now, to which the guy asked if he could be released from the camp. Lu Shen replied that he would stay for a little longer, as he had no reason to go back for now anyway. When the guy left, the lieutenant colonel said that she never thought she would one day be envious of another person's talent. But of one thing she was certain, he was not like them, and he was destined for a different path. The major, too, was certain that the boy was destined to change their world. A while later, Lu Shen arrived back in his city at the Martial Arts Association to see President Xiaoyun. If he remembered correctly, the president's office was on the 6th floor, which was where he headed to. He was met by the secretary in the hallway outside the president's office, from which loud shouts could be heard. Lu Shen didn't know if this was the right time, so he decided to inquire about what was going on there. The secretary didn't bother to explain anything and simply asked him to go inside. The doors opened, and the girl announced to the president that Lu Shen had arrived. There was a man sitting in the office with Xiaoyun, and at the sight of Lu Sheng, he began to shout if he was the genius that the president had been buzzing his ears about. The man jumped up and walked around the guy a few times, talking about how young he looked. He stood in the doorway and went on to say that not everyone was destined to be born as talented as his granddaughter, and that they shouldn't be angry about it. The president seemed uncomfortable with such a speech and felt a kind of awkwardness. The man showed a photo of his granddaughter and said that there are many people who are inferior to his beloved Charlene, and this guy Lu Shen is no exception. The president didn't know what to say anymore and was literally boiling with anger as he glared at Lu Shen. Xiaoyun immediately exploded and began to menacingly ask why the guy had returned before the official end of the training camp. Lu Shen held out the envelope that Lieutenant Colonel Dan had given him as an explanation to the president. The man dubiously began to say that some document from the Dan family was unlikely to be of value in the Bai-He Association. He pointed to some seal on the envelope and was sure that the guy had done some mischief and was now trying to blame it all on the president. The man was sure of what he was saying, but stayed to see what was in the envelope. At that very second, the president of the Martial Arts Association tore open the envelope and began to read the contents. Immediately, his gaze changed, and his eyes rounded and gave off a look of intense surprise and even shock. The man was still trying to scoff and asked the president not to get too nervous. The president didn't even pay attention to the annoying little man and asked Lu Shen when he managed to reach the 3rd rank. The guy replied that it was about a month ago, and Lieutenant Column Dan had personally arranged for him to be tested. He also added that the Eastern Military District had the right to award him the new rank, and all he needed from him was a seal and consent. Xiaoyun also learned that Lieutenant Colonel Dan was the representative of the Eastern District, and all that was required from himself was a seal, to which he happily agreed. The man immediately snatched the document and began to quickly study it, unable to believe his eyes. There was no limit to his insolence as he began to say that the document was a forgery. The president snatched the document from him and told him that if he did not believe him, he could go away and that the document was real. For credibility, he pointed out on the document the huge steel seal of the Eastern District right in the center of the paper. The man started shouting that he didn't believe it because a guy who was kicked out of the training camp couldn't have that much fighting power and strength. Lu Shen was getting tired of listening to this hysterical nonsense from the stranger. He began to say that no one had kicked him out, although he could hardly believe it. The guy also added that the lieutenant colonel personally asked him to call and confirm receipt of the document with its authenticity. Present laughed and told the man that it was simply impossible not to believe it, and someone needs to be less suspicious. Everyone knew that Lieutenant Column Dan was called the genius of the military district, and since she had asked Xiaoyun to make the call, he would gladly do it. The president set up a huge screen for a video call, which Lieutenant Colonel Dan quickly connected to. She immediately inquired if the guy had arrived to see the president in Baihe City and received an instant greeting from him. The man began to realize that it was all true, because on the screen, he had indeed seen Lieutenant Colonel Dan. At that moment, Charlene appeared on the screen, recognizing her grandfather by his voice, and started asking what he was doing there. The lieutenant colonel got angry and ordered the girl to immediately go practice her spiritual power, because her workload for today had been increased tenfold. Xiaoyun decided to smooth things over somehow and began to say that he had received a document that he was already ready to approve. The lieutenant colonel replied that the president shouldn't procrastinate too long because the guy would be the representative of the eastern provinces at the general's review in Dongning province. She also added that Lu Shen was the strongest in their training camp, and that was the reason why he shouldn't stay there anymore. The president of the Martial Arts Association was shocked by what he heard and only had words about the general's review in his mind. Charlene's grandfather was shocked just as much, but what hurt him more was that the guy was called the strongest in the camp. That very second, he realized who his granddaughter had told him so much about. The lieutenant colonel continued to mentor Charlene so that she could defeat Lu Shen, but the girl was sure that would never happen. The president said he understood and could end the conversation, but the lieutenant colonel asked to have a word with the boy, clarifying for him that she had found almost all the necessary ingredients for the Spirit Master's elixirs. Dan added that if anything else was needed, he could just send her the list. Lastly, she said that he needed to get recognized as a spiritual master as soon as possible so that he could make purchases on his own. As soon as the call disconnected, the president pounced on the guy asking when he had time to pass the spiritual master test. Lu Shen modestly replied that it was where they discovered his talent for spiritual powers, so the lieutenant colonel sent a letter of recommendation for testing to the Spiritual Master Association, to which the president was just overjoyed and said that he never doubted him. Charlene's grandfather was in the president's office the entire time and couldn't utter a word. They both left the association and the president offered to call him a car, but the guy refused, to which Xiao began to invite him to all sorts of breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. Lu Shen caught a cab and replied that in that case they had a deal. The cab driver noticed that the president of the association was too nice to the guy and asked what their relationship was. Lu Shen thought that if even the driver noticed it, the president was definitely enamored with him, but replied that it was just that Xiao was a good person. Suddenly, the cab driver abruptly slammed on the brakes and stopped as there was something strange in their way. The signboard of Crimson River School was broken in half and was lying right in the middle of the road. Lu Shen got out of the car and looked at it for a while, trying to figure out what had happened. Meanwhile, in the school itself, something strange was going on involving a certain Lin Tashan, who said that he had come to discuss martial arts rather than business. He also said that he had come here specifically to give them a lesson. Ni Shuang stood with her father and said that it was unfair to take advantage of her father's injury and move here with a 4th rank. The father replied to the guy that he had already promised not to take any more disciples next year, and what more did he need? Lin said that he should have thought before making such a huge signboard. Father said he was always ready to defend his honor after all. That's what he came here for 20 years ago. He was all alone and was able to lay the foundation for his school. Father was confident that if he succeeded then, he would succeed now. Nie Shuang was very worried about her father and shouted at him to leave it all behind. Lin inquired if that 18-year-old kid was a student of their school. The girl immediately replied that she had repeatedly said that he was not their student and just came here occasionally. Lin menacingly kicked his foot and said that he didn't care about these little things as he wasn't interested in the details. He continued to shout that he was aware that the school had used this young man's name and poached half of the students from his school. Lin was certain that since they had ingratiated themselves with someone else's, they should be willing to be held accountable for it. Nai sternly replied that it was the students' own decision, and no one had poached them here. Lin continued to threaten and informed them that if they were sure of that, he would flatten them into the school today. In that case, there would be nowhere for their boys to study, and they would return to his school. The girl was just furious at this guy's insolence and wanted to answer him. She said that she would fight him herself and find out everything. Lin only guffawed and said that he was somehow worried about breaking such a beautiful flower. His father strictly forbade it because the rank of this guy was achieved by hard training, and even he, with an injury, is not a fact that he can cope with him, and she's certainly not to compete. The girl reminded him that she was also a rank 3 warrior, and even against such an opponent, the two of them would not lose. Lin pretended that he was not interested in this, and he had no time to listen to the family squabbles, so he would like to deal with it all as soon as possible. Ni sternly told the guy that they would fight right now, and she would make him carry their school's signboard through the streets of the city. Lin was already preparing to fight and noted that the girl was too sharp of tongue. Before his attack, he managed to say as if he was kind of sorry. The guy was already flying with all his combat power straight at the girl. The father simply could not allow this and blocked his daughter, who cried out in horror. The man's powerful blow flew far into the wall, piercing it and leaving a deep mark. Lin chuckled and said that this founder of the purple school couldn't even reflect a palm strike. Father tried to stand up and said that Lin Tishun had reached the 5th rank. Lin replied that there was nothing to be so surprised about it, because while he was hiding behind the walls of his school and training the little ones, too much had happened. Lin also asked the founder if it had been a long time since he had fought a master like him. The founder realized that he had no choice and said that if he wanted this school to close down, he would go to the association right now. He was going to submit his resignation and suspend the school for accepting students. Nishuang couldn't believe it and even wept since she literally grew up here since she was in diapers. Lin replied that this old man still had at least a handful of reason left, so he would quietly leave. Suddenly, someone walked through the door of the school and asked the guy not to hurry so much. It was Lu Shen, who was already ready to attack the insolent man. But first he asked what would happen if such a good school closed down and he had nowhere to exercise. Ni Shuang was surprised by such a visit, but realized that it could save them. Lu Shen politely greeted the girl, while Lin Tishun's men were talking amongst themselves that this guy was the reason why they had students leaving them. This only made Lin Tishun even more angry, and he ordered everyone to shut up immediately. He approached Lu Shen and sensed his great strength, so he said that he shouldn't be upset about the closure of this school, as his Steel Mountain would gladly welcome him. Lin clarified that any normal person could see what kind of scum this school was, since they couldn't even repel a single blow from him, so it was very doubtful that they would be able to teach anyone anything. At the end of his speech, the guy invited Lu Shen to come to his Steel Mountain, and he would personally teach him the secret techniques. Lu Shen asked what kind of school it was, and Lin told him that there they taught unique techniques that could make a warrior invincible, and among the 4th-rank masters, few had managed to break through his steel armor. The founder of the Crimson River thought that Lu Shen was really interested in this suggestion, and was even somehow upset. Lu Shen wondered if he could really be trained in such a powerful technique there. Lin happily replied that he only needed to join them, and he would personally be his mentor. Lu Sheng had his own plan for this, and asked how exactly they were going to train him. Lin was already beyond thrilled that the guy had so many questions, which showed his interest, so he asked him to take his time like this. He didn't have time to continue as his body started to transform into a steel frame. This could only mean that he had just been assassinated. Lin could barely withstand the attack and felt the powerful force holding him back. It was Lu Shen who was tired of listening to the guy's empty promises and got straight to the point. He even said that he was holding back quite well and continued to attack. At some point, Lin Tishun couldn't withstand the attack anymore and flew into the wall with a thunderous crash. He made a huge hole in it in the shape of his body and fell backwards. Lin was left standing defeated on his knees in a pile of broken stones. Lu Shen came closer and wondered how he wanted to train him after all. He looked down at him, which was justified, as he was not the one who was slumped against the wall. Lu Shen declared in front of everyone that Lin Tishun had lost, and he had to admit it. Lin's men started arguing with each other over the information about this guy and rushed to their master's aid to get out of here. They took the master away and yelled for Lu Shen to now walk around and be afraid, but he didn't care and headed towards the founder of the school. The boy held out his hand to the founder's daughter and asked if she was all right. The girl put her hand into Lu Shen's palm and replied that she was fine. The boy asked the founder not to close the school as it was the closest place to his home and he didn't want to look for another one. The founder immediately agreed and said that if the guy needed anything, he would be happy to help him. The guy replied that it was his fault too, but he only helped today and they should be stronger next time. On that note, the guy bowed politely and quickly headed for the exit. The father wondered to his daughter what kind of strength this guy had if he had defeated a rank 5 warrior with just one light punch. Lu Shen returned home, and his mother rushed home worriedly asking why he was so late. After all, he had promised to return for dinner. The boy explained the situation of the attack and that he was protecting an old man, but he was fine. The mother rushed to check if her son was okay, and the father laughed merrily and said that her son was now a real warrior. The father also added that this is what it means to be a true warrior when you can come to the aid of the weak in time. The sister asked her brother in a whisper what kind of meat he was sending them, after which the father went on the mend and her strength increased. She even thought he might have stolen it, but Lu quickly reassured her by sweetly rubbing her cheek. His mother began to wonder how things were going at the training camp, and even said that if it was too hard for him there, he could always come home. The father said the woman didn't understand anything about it and let him stay out of it. He also said that he had believed in his son since childhood and always saw him as a winner, because now he would definitely become a hero and accomplish a great feat. Lu Shen was pleased to hear such a thing from his father, and he thanked him politely. At this moment, he decided that he had to become even stronger to protect everyone from the coming evil. Back in his room, the boy finally immersed himself in the world of the future. Another enraged zombie was running at him to attack, not yet aware of the guy's strength. Lu Shen made a huge hole in the monster with one blow, thus destroying it. He took away its energy power and thought about the fact that now even a rank 6 zombie master could destroy even a rank 6 zombie master with one blow. Finally, after a long time, Lu Shen was finally able to sneak into the very military center of the base that he had left for dessert. He immediately remembered the mighty zombie he saw in the beginning and wondered if he could defeat it this time, but he decided to look around first. Just as the guy was thinking about it, he saw the same monster on the tower. He was looking at him from the height with his powerful gaze, in which was hidden great power. At that very second, something like an explosion happened, blowing up the ground around Lu Shen. There was no way the guy expected to see this great zombie master in front of him right now. The zombie emerged from the rubble and walked surrounded by a bright glow from his endless power and energy. Lu felt that his energy was as solid as steel, and even his 6th rank couldn't compare to this great power, the power of a guru. He remembered that when one absorbed many martial skills at a time, there was an unquenchable desire to destroy everything one saw, and as long as he used crystal vision, he could deal with his inner aggression. Except now there was a special case where the guy didn't want to retreat at all, but rather adopt all of his combat power. Lu Shen decided to attack first and used his wind breath and 6 times star power to attack. He quickly rushed towards his opponent, framed by a green glow. The guy even managed to land some kind of blow on the zombie guru, but it wasn't yet clear exactly how strong it was. At the moment of the blow, Lu Shen noticed the zombie's face, which was clearly saying that it wasn't enough. A second later, the guy was swept backwards with such force that he couldn't even stop right away. Lu was confused for a moment. After all, he had just used a huge force against this zombie, and he wasn't even hurt, and it seems that this is the power of a real guru. All this only encouraged the guy even more, and he invoked the breath of fire. Along with that, he decided to apply 10 times the power of the stars to solidify the result. A real heat began as rocks and pieces of earth flew around from this power. The bright flames of powerful energy were pitted against the legendary zombie guru's strength. For a moment, Lu Shen didn't even notice his opponent approaching and was shocked. Right behind his energy force shield stood a zombie without a single damage, surrounded by some kind of defense. The guy remembered rumors that gurus have a protective field that even the strongest bullets can't penetrate, and most likely this was it. Right in front of him at arm's length stood a zombie in his force field. One glance from the guru Lu Shen's gaze sent him backwards again, only not as much anymore. When the guy stopped, he guessed that the monster wasn't even going to attack him. He was not satisfied with this scenario because in this case, it was impossible to get close to him, and his attacks had not yielded any results, even though he had used almost all of his strength, but this zombie did not even take a step back and even created a force field. Lu Shen realized that this zombie didn't even consider him as an opponent, and if he attacked, it was unlikely that he would be able to survive at all. Although they only had a difference of 1 rank, the gap was colossal because a whole gulf could be felt between them. He realized that he couldn't deal with him one-on-one right now, but there had to be some way. Lu Shen didn't know exactly how, but he was sure that he had to destroy the zombie and take away its battle memories. The guy became very angry, and at this moment, he decided to rush into the attack, making several precise, powerful punches. In response, the zombie guru from his dome directed a stream of demolishing power at the guy. This time, Lu Shen managed to deftly recoil and even stand on his feet. He finally realized that even the defense of such a strong zombie was not perfect. He felt that his force field had weakened, and although it wasn't too noticeable, it was still a breakthrough. Thus he had a chance, but it would only be possible after 1,000,000 such strikes, and his strength was running low. He realized that without the ability to constantly recover with the breathing technique, he wouldn't last long. Lu Shen was even thinking of retreating and trying again when he became stronger, then the level 6 zombies would no longer be a problem. And then he remembered that he still hadn't used the spiritual power punch yet. He hadn't really practiced his spiritual techniques yet, and was only using them as a supporting element. He couldn't even believe that he had forgotten that he was considered a strong rank 3 spiritual power master. Compared to martial arts skills, spiritual powers were much more powerful. The most important thing was to concentrate. Unfortunately, he couldn't concentrate all of his power into something like a sword yet, but what he had was not bad. The guy created something like a crystal flower and rushed with it to attack. The crystals crashed into the guru's protective dome with all their might and began to press down on him with their energy. At some point, Lu Shen noticed that there was an effect, albeit slow. He decided not to stop there and thought of something else. It became obvious to him that he needed to use as much spiritual power as possible to win. He tried to concentrate again and created another crystal flower, only much larger. In the same second, he launched it upwards at the first, into the protective dome with the zombies. The long-awaited result on this impact finally appeared, and the dome cracked. Lu Shen felt that it was still not enough and created another crystal. This time, its size and power surpassed the previous ones by several times and was sent to the others. The power of all these crystals was simply incredible and could already slay several 6th or even 7th rank masters, but not gurus. The protective dome was still cracked, but it was still a complete shell, and Lu Shen didn't understand why it still hadn't broken through yet. He realized that he needed to increase and combine all his strength together and attack. The guy used his spiritual power together with his flame breath and 10 times the power of the stars to strike a perfect blow. The earth trembled and everything around him felt as if it had been affected by a strong earthquake. Lu Shen at this moment only wished that the dome would break already, so he pushed one last time. After many attempts to break the zombie guru's defense, he still succeeded. The defense dome shattered and the zombie was left standing there, waiting for his opponent. Lu Shen was desperate to seize the sage's will, memory, and skills. It was for this reason that he landed his final crushing blow directly at his opponent. For a moment, it seemed to the guy that the zombie even smiled at him, as if thanking him for all of this. He looked straight into Lu Shen's eyes and honored him with all the experience he had accumulated over the years. Lu Shen himself was taken aback by this turn of events, and as soon as the zombie's power touched him, he plunged into his memories. Various images flashed through his mind, including Mr. Shi Shengning's initiation as a guru. Next was the memory when Shi Shengning had to let his family go to safety to stay to fight the monsters in the base. While his strength was flowing into him, he saw how the guru had to fight a rank 9 monster with incredible power. Just seeing it was enough to make his body tremble with fear, and although he had already become a guru with an unyielding will himself, he was still afraid. He had seen the warrior from the Eastern District defeat him with a single blow, taking hope for all of humanity. The guru managed to overpower the monster, but he could feel the coldness spilling over his body. He saw a new monster on the horizon and guessed that this was how the arrival of death was felt. Shuri knew that the Martial Arts Alliance had launched the Beam Project to create 12th rank warriors, and he was glad that people had a chance, which, unfortunately for him, was without his participation. There was no way Lu Shen could recover from such a flood of memories that were truly legendary. The volume of memories being absorbed was far greater than ever before. A martial arts master named Shi Shengning had lived his entire life by training alone. The guy realized that his martial techniques and combat experience now belonged to him. At this moment, he felt a rapid increase in combat power. The increase in strength was followed by an increase in power with the peak of the current rank, literally tearing the guy from the inside out. Lu Shen could finally feel the true limits of control. The name of a certain Wang He flashed in the zombie's memories as often as his wife and children. The guy knew very well that Wang He was the creator of the star tempering technique. He even thought that in 10,000 years, this master was one of the wisest on earth. This was the kind of person who could safely be called a true Oriental master. Even 7th rank Shi Shengning admired him, and had most likely seen Wang He use his attacking strike once. It was a strike of such power that martial artists couldn't even imagine such power, but for some reason, Lu couldn't find anything in his memories. He began to dig deeper and deeper, looking through just hundreds and even thousands of different pictures. At one point, he noticed some sort of glowing orb under his feet and reached for it. At that very second, he was sucked inside this ball of memories by a whirlwind. The guy dived inside Xu Shengning's mind and realized that this was one of the enemies that the guru had once faced. Even though he was already an outstanding warrior with extraordinary abilities, he was still scared to plunge into this darkness. He could only see Xu Shengning in the distance of this dark tunnel and could only guess what was there. In ancient mythology, the Golden Raven was the emperor's advisor and served as his eyes, while he himself was the viceroy of the sun. When the sky was swallowed up by the 10 suns, the rivers began to dry up and the earth cracked. The heat enveloped everything around, and not a single living thing on earth survived. This was what Xu Shenning devoted himself to, studying the skill with which he was trying to reach the 8th rank of martial arts. The name of this technique was Heaven of 10 Suns, representing a simply unbelievably immense strength. Lu Sheng felt like he had absorbed every last drop of this power. From this moment on, all of this legendary power belonged to him alone. After all this, the guy was pensively looking out the window at the city of the future. It seemed to him as if his spiritual powers had undergone some kind of change. At this moment, he felt the absorbed energy coming out and the way it spilled all over his body. Lu Shen once again tried to concentrate and combine all his strength with the guru's power. He finally succeeded, and the energy fused into one, becoming many times more powerful. He felt, not in quantity, but in quality, his Milo increased very much. At this moment, Lu remembered that the basis of Charlene's power was air, from which she drew energy. With Lieutenant Column Dan, such a source was water, filling her to the brim. But for the guy himself, it was something like a glowing ball of metal. Although the form of this power was still not completely stable, but he could already feel it much better. Lu Shen tried to take another look at the force mixing, and was once again pleasantly surprised at such an incredible progress. He carefully lifted the power emanating from his hand closer to his face, and after scrutinizing it, he thought about how he would use it. Lu Shen didn't even notice as he accidentally directed the power to one of the high-rises across the street and began to lift it, guessing that it was working through the power of thought, as if his spiritual power had increased tenfold. The guy realized that mere warriors couldn't even imagine such a thing, because he could clearly feel his body at a new stage of development. Now, he was absolutely sure that even a small amount of spiritual power was able to easily deal with a warrior of the 3rd or even 4th rank. To top it all off, the guy was now able to recreate the Great Master's force field, and although it was at the initial level, the field itself was growing as his spiritual power increased. At this point, the thickness of his field was not even close to the field of that zombie, compared to which was just a plastic bag relative to the iron basket. Either way, Lu Shen was still less vulnerable with it, and thus better protected. He compared his new power to a small seed that would definitely grow one day. Not only would it become a tree, but it would fully embody his skill. Lu Shen remembered his meeting with Miss He and had already arrived at the banquet hall. He waited for the girl for a while, and then wrote to her that he was already there and waiting for her, to which she replied that she was already rushing over. The guy realized that now he couldn't eat meat daily since he was no longer in the training camp, but his body needed energy, so it was time to contact the manufacturer with the serum. In the doorway of the banquet hall, Mrs. He stood panting, looking for Lu Shen with a glance.